Welcome to the definitive course on Claude Code. I use Claude Code every day as the director of AI and ML at a VC-funded fintech startup. I also teach over 1,500 people in my school server, the AI MBA, how to use Claude Code for professional, personal, and also for academic research applications. Claude Code is actually misnamed. It's an incredible tool for coding, but it's really a tool which will give you leverage in every aspect of your life. In this course, you're not going to need to have any technical background. Maybe you've played around with ChatGPT or Claude in the past, using it as a Google replacement. I'm going to take you step by step, all the way from not knowing anything at all to being able to deploy a full-blown web application. However, this isn't one of those courses where I'm going to fill you up with 3 hours of theory before you're able to do anything practical. I'm going to give you practical applications that you can take away that add value to your life within the first 10 minutes so that you're able to pair the theory that I'm teaching you with practical applications, making them more solid in your head so that you can go off and do whatever it is that you want to do with Claude Code. Let me give you an overview of what we're going to discuss in this course. We're going to start by talking about what Claude Code actually is, how much it costs, and how to install it. And I'll give you 2 practical exercises that you can do in the first few minutes of this tutorial. Claude Code is a program that runs in a terminal, which might be an unfamiliar environment for many of you. I'll help you get used to it. And we'll also talk about Claude Code's interface and some of the basic commands that it contains so that you're very comfortable at a basic level with what Claude Code does. Next, I'll show you a tool called Claude Code Guide, which can help answer any questions you have about Claude Code. I'll talk about why voice is the best way to interact with Claude Code and how to do that. And one of the big distinctions with Claude Code is that it's going to have access to your full computer. So I'm going to show you a few different tools, the permission system and hooks, which are going to protect your computer from any dangerous actions Claude Code might take. I'll also talk about the CLAUDE.md file, which in the past and which many other tutorials may tell you you have to have in a project, but I'm going to tell you why you really shouldn't be making one and what you should do instead. Then we'll get into what I call the 5 primitives of Claude Code. These are sort of the 5 fundamental features, and we'll use one of them to connect to your email and calendar to enable all sorts of automations. One of those that we'll build is an email digest skill using one of these primitives, skills, which in my opinion is the most important. And I'll discuss the distinction between skills versus MCPs, which confuses a lot of people. If you haven't heard about MCPs, don't worry, I'll explain what those are. We'll talk about the plugin system, which allows you to install a large set of skills and MCPs. You can just think of these as automations all at once. And finally, I'll introduce one more concept called subagents, which let you parallelize a lot of work, allowing you to work a lot faster than you otherwise would. We'll discuss when to use one of these sort of primitives versus building an application. And then I'll work through some of the prerequisites you need to have to build real applications, such as using the version control system Git. I'll talk about the technologies that we're going to use to build a web application. And then we're going to build a full-on job tracker. So this will be very useful to you all who are applying for jobs, but which you'll be able to adapt to make any kind of web application. We'll create a skill that you can use to communicate with the web application. And finally, we'll get this live on the actual internet with a login interface so that not everybody can see your cover letters, pipeline, etc. All right, so to start, what is Claude Code? Now, as I mentioned, Claude Code is not really just a coding tool. This is a little bit of a misunderstanding. But to get the clearest understanding of what it is, let's see how coding works outside of Claude Code when you're just using Claude or ChatGPT in the web interface. So here I am in the Claude web UI, and I can ask Claude here to do some kind of coding type task for me. So for example, I can ask it, make me a Python script, which shows every state of the United States, but has them colored across according to a gradient by population of the state. And so when I do that, it's going to go through a process of finding the populations of each of these states and then creating some sort of map. But the scripts that it creates are not going to be located on my actual computer. I'll be able to copy and paste them out of this interface once it's done, but by default, they're not going to show up on my computer. Additionally, if I wanted it to, say, do an analysis of a financial Excel spreadsheet that my accountant or some colleague has sent me, by default, Claude in this interface is not going to have access to this information, whereas Claude Code will. So the big difference, not the only difference, but a big difference is that Claude Code gets access to your entire file system and to any sort of external tools that you give it access to. So Claude Web, which is what I just started, is running in this sandbox, can't see my files, can't run commands on my computer, whereas Claude Code is running on my actual computer, can see my files, run terminal commands, I can install packages and have them available in the future, whereas in this one, I have to go through, if I'm depending on some external tools or packages, install them from scratch each time. One good analogy is that Claude is like texting a friend for advice, whereas Claude Code is having the friend sit down at your computer and do the work for you. Let's go to a practical exercise that you'll be able to do right away after we go through the setup steps in the next section. This is a popular AI YouTuber who does really in-depth interviews. His name is Dwarkesh Patel, and here's an interview he recently did with Terence Tao, one of the world's top mathematicians, describing how he uses AI. Now, what I want to do, because I don't have the time to watch this video, is have Claude Code download the transcript of that video, summarize it, and tell me how to apply it to economics research. Since I'm an economist, a lot of the people I work with are economists, and so that is something that I'd want to know if I'm watching that video. So what I'm going to do is just go here, copy the URL, I'll come back here, and I'm going to ask Claude Code, can you use YTDLP to download the subtitles of this video and then give me a summary based on the video of the things that are going to be most relevant to economics research? And you can think broadly about different kinds of economics research. And so that's it. Now it's going to go through a process autonomously of downloading the subtitles. And here's an important feature. So if you look here, you'll see that it's using a tool called YTDLP. That's a tool which I'm going to help you install, which can be used to download YouTube subtitles from YouTube. But this is something that won't be available in the web interface if you're using ChatGPT or Claude to help you write tools or do things for you. You can set up ChatGPT and Claude to connect to certain external systems, but you can't just install arbitrary tools like I'm doing over here. Now, if we come back over here to this thing that I put Claude to, we see another problem which arises when you use Claude or ChatGPT to try to do your coding for you. And so we see over here that it says Claude reached its tool use limit for this turn. And so errors like this are something which is going to happen to you often if you try to use the web UI as your programming interface, whereas in the terminal, these tools are able to work very autonomously, just grab everything themselves. And we can see here that a full-on summary of the things that are going to be most important to me have been given to me in just a few seconds, whereas that other task was sitting around for minutes and then finally got stuck. And so this is one of the many things that's going to make Claude Code such a useful tool for you. The environment in which I was using Claude Code is called a terminal, and terminals may be a new or unfamiliar concept for you. So I'm going to explain them in great detail. But before I get to it, let me talk about the different options you have for paying for Claude Code and how to install Claude Code on your computer. With Claude Code, there are three main plans. There's the free plan, which does not include Claude Code. There's the pro plan, which does get you Claude Code and a related tool called Cowork. And then there's the max plan, which if you pay $100 per month will get you 5 times the amount of usage as the pro plan, and which if you pay $200 per month will get you 20 times the amount of usage as the pro plan. So which one of these should you pay for? If you want to get started, you can get started on the $20 per month plan. And for learning purposes, $20 a month will be perfectly fine. But there is a catch. When you use Claude Code, there are 2 kinds of limits. There's a limit for a given session, how much you can use Claude Code in a 5-hour window, and there's a limit for how much you can use Claude Code in a week. When you're using the $20 a month plan, it's very likely that you will hit your session limits for 5 hours, in maybe 30 minutes to 1 hour of use of Claude Code. And then you'll have to wait 4 more hours before you can start using Claude Code again. Now, if you're okay with that, that's fine. But a way that's going to limit you, especially as you start to use it more and more, is that you're going to learn to use Claude Code a lot more slowly than somebody who has the $100 a month plan, who will be able to, for learning purposes, basically be able to use Claude Code to an unlimited degree. I have a $200 a month plan because I use it professionally, and sometimes I do even hit my limits on $200 per month. So my recommendation is start with 20, but realize that you're probably going to have to upgrade to 100 at some point. And if that occurs, just think of it as an investment in your future and realize that for pretty much any business, personal, or academic purpose, we're going to find ways to get way more than $100 of value out of Claude Code. Anyway, for now, let's say we'll go with the $17 if it's annual or $20 monthly subscription. So you'll click here, try Claude. It'll ask you to enter your email or continue with Google. So I'll put in one of my emails here. All right, so I put in the email. Let me get the verification code and then see what the next step is. So I got this sign-in link to Claude. Let me go through with it. All right, I'm going to put in my name, Aniket Panjwani. I agree. I don't want to subscribe. Verify my phone number. I'm going to use it for personal use. All right, back here, I'm going to choose a monthly pro plan. Get the pro plan. All right, so here is where you'd then enter in your payment details. And then as soon as you go through, you'll now have a Claude subscription. I'm not going to enter it again because I already have one, but go through with that. And then we'll move on to the next step, installing Claude Code. To install Claude Code, you come over here to the Claude Code docs at code.claude.com/docs. If you go to the quick start here, you'll see it says, before you begin, make sure you have a terminal or command prompt open. So if you're using a Mac, then you just type in terminal and you'll find this terminal application, which when you click on that, it's going to open a window like this. So that's where you want to get to. If you're using Windows, you're going to want to have installed something called Windows Subsystem for Linux, which is basically Linux inside of Windows. Claude Code is going to be able to work much better in that environment. I have a full tutorial specifically on how to install Claude Code on Windows. I'll have that linked in the description below, and I go through all the install steps. Once you have either the Windows Subsystems for Linux or your Mac OS or Linux terminal open, you just copy this command here with copy, and then you go back to your terminal and you simply paste that in. That's it. And then press enter. Then you wait a few seconds and Claude Code will be installed. Next, I recommend opening a new terminal, which if you're on a Mac, you can just do with Command T. That will refresh the environment to make sure that Claude Code is available in this terminal environment. And then just type in Claude, and you should see a screen like this, which is the initial setup step. So here we can choose whether we want dark mode, light mode, or various other dark modes. I like the normal dark mode, so I'll go with that. And then you can choose whether to install Claude Code with your subscription, with API billing, or with a third-party platform. So for all of you, you're going to want to use this, the subscription. And so just press enter, and it's going to open up a page, which if you're logged in to the Claude subscription that you had signed up for, will ask you to connect to your Claude account. I'm going to say authorize there. And now if we go back to Claude Code, it says logged in as aniket.panjwani@gmail.com, login successful, press enter to continue. Claude Code can make mistakes. Should we use the recommended settings? Sure, there we go. Now we're right here in Claude Code. We now have the interface set up where we're going to be interacting with Claude Code, but we also need to be able to see the files that Claude Code is going to generate. And in order to have that, we have to install what is called an integrated development environment. And the particular one we're going to install is called VS Code. So I recommend just Googling here for install VS Code. Come down here to where it says download Visual Studio Code. You'll see different options. I'm going to choose the one for Mac. The download's begun. Let me wait a few seconds. All right, so go find the file, open it up, and in a Mac, you just grab it and then drag it to your applications. And that's going to install VS Code on your computer. On Windows, it'll be a little bit different. Once it's installed, you should find yourself able to open it and you'll see something like this. I'm going to explain this in a lot more detail as we get into it, but for now, I just want you to get it installed. Next, there's a few more prerequisites I want to take you to. These are just small programs that we'll install that Claude Code is going to be able to use to do lots of very useful things. First, I want you to install Homebrew, which is a package manager, which will allow you on Mac OS or Linux or the Windows subsystem for Linux to install all sorts of useful utilities that Claude Code is going to be able to make use of, such as YTDLP, that tool I used to download YouTube subtitles. So copy this and then go over to your terminal, just paste it in, press enter, and then it might ask you for your password, enter it in. You'll see something like this, press enter again, and it will go through this installation process. Great. Now it's installed, and the last setup step I want you to do is install a few utilities that will be useful for exercises we're going to now do with Brew. Just type in brew install YT-DLP and pandoc and press enter, and it's going to check if these exist or update them for you. So I already have these installed, so it's just updating them. Next, I want to take you through a practical exercise, making your own website in just under a few minutes. And in order to do this, we're going to use a feature of Claude Code called skills, which are instructions to Claude Code of how to do certain tasks in a repeatable way. And the skill that we're going to use is the front-end design skill, which is a skill that Claude Code can use to make beautiful websites. So I'm going to be showing you how to install this skill and use this skill, and you may not have a full understanding of all the concepts that we're going to be installing and using. Those are going to be introduced again later in the course, so don't worry, but I want to get you to doing practical things with Claude Code as quickly as possible, so let's just install this front-end design skill, maybe walk a little bit through what it does, then use it to make a website. So I'm back here in the terminal. Let's type in Claude again to open up a Claude Code session. Here we are. And the first thing I need you to do is to type this in /plugin marketplace add anthropics /skills into your Claude Code session. And so what that's doing is making a set of plugins available to us. Plugins are sets of skills, and skills are particular automations to help us do things with Claude Code. So again, a little bit complex, but it's all going to fit together over time. Just stick through the course, work through it piece by piece. Next, I want you to type in this little bit /plugin install example skills at anthropic-agent-skills. So I'm just going to copy it. I'll have this URL also in the description below. I'll come over here. I'm just going to paste that in, press enter. And for me, this is already installed. For you, you're going to be able to now see it available in your Claude Code session. So what I recommend is pressing Control-C twice. That's how you exit Claude Code. Control-C, we can see it says Control-C again to exit. So you got to do it twice in succession. Control-C, Control-C. Now I've exited. Then I type in Claude again. That's going to start a new session, and any changes I may have made to my plugins or settings are now going to be manifest in the Claude Code session. Now, if in your fresh Claude Code session, you type in front-end design, you're going to see something come up here that says example skills create distinctive production-grade front-end interfaces. So let's open that up and just press enter. Now it's going to ask you what it would like you to build. So I'm going to tell it, I have a website it's kind of ugly and gross looking. Can you just make a better version of that website for me? Just make me a version that we put in this current folder that I'm in right now, maybe in a subdirectory for whatever it is that we're doing right now. and then just open it up for me in the web browser. I really like how Anthropic makes their websites, so maybe we could use that as inspiration, but just download everything off my website that you need to help you make a better version of the website. So for context, this is my current website. I made it as a sort of exercise, but it's pretty ugly. I went for this sort of brutalist retro theme. Not a big fan, but here I'm going to try to do a very quick redesign using this front-end design skill. And so we see here a few things that are going to help us learn how Claude Code works. So first, Claude Code is asking for permission to be able to navigate to this website and take a look at what it looks like and take a screenshot. So I'm going to say, yes, go ahead. But if I wanted to say yes and allow it to always do this thing again in the future, I could choose the option 2. If I don't want to allow it to do this, but that's going to stop Claude Code from proceeding, I could choose the option 3. So I'm going to choose the option 2. Now it's asking me for something else, I guess, to get the web content. So again, I'm going to let it do that. And now it's asking me to take a screenshot. So right now, you can see that it's kind of annoying. It's asking me for permission to do each individual thing. Later on in this course, I'm going to talk about how you can get around that to let Claude Code work autonomously, either completely on your computer or at least for certain sets of things that you're totally okay with Claude Code doing by itself. Another thing you see here is this thing bootstrapping. So Claude Code will always just have some sort of silly verb that comes up. There'll be working, thinking, schmoozing, bamboozling. We see how long this sort of task has been going on for. And we also see here this thing that says a number of tokens that have been used. All right, so now we're opening up Anthropic's website, and I guess Claude Code is taking a look at that. One thing that we're seeing here is that Claude Code isn't asking me for permission here because I already said once that I had given it permission to do this thing. So now it wants to create a folder in my downloads folder to have this redesign. So I'm going to go here and say yes and always allow access to downloads. And we can see that there's this little token meter that's increasing. So a fundamental aspect of Claude Code, which we're going to get to in the next section, is that the actions that Claude Code takes take up a concept called tokens. And there's a certain token limit that you have for each Claude Code session. We'll talk a little bit more in just a few minutes on what those token limits mean and what their impacts are to you. Now, one thing I mentioned is that in order to see the files that we're working on, we want to use a tool called VS Code. So let's go back to VS Code so that we can open up this folder and be able to see whatever it is that Claude Code is doing. So here I am on VS Code. I'm going to say open folder. And then right here, we can see this folder that Claude Code has made for us. So I'm going to open that up. Then you'll see something like this asking if you trust the authors of this folder. You can just say yes. And now once Claude Code makes some files for us, they're going to show up right in this section of VS Code. Right now, there's nothing there because Claude Code is still in progress doing work. So currently it's gone from bamboozling or whatever it was on before to swooping. Let's let it swoop for a minute or two and then see where we're at in a little bit. All right, so it's got the redesign and now it's asking us for permission to open it up in the browser. So I'm going to say yes. Hey, and would you look at that? We've got a redesigned version of my website right here. Okay, this YouTube thing doesn't show up, but it's pretty good. I already like this a lot better than this super ugly, weird thing that I had produced here. So just in one shot, we've been able to make a pretty good looking new website, stealing the theme of another website, adapting it for our own. But how do you then deploy that on the public internet? We're going to get to that later in the course. But first, let's discuss the terminal, which is the environment that Claude Code is in and everything that you need to understand about the terminal. When computers first came out, there was no graphical user interface. These are the interfaces where you're clicking around, using your mouse. Instead, you had to do everything on a keyboard in a terminal. It's the same computer and the same files, but you're just typing instead of clicking. Now, we use, and I'm going to be teaching in this course, how to use Claude Code in the terminal. And that's one way in which you can use Claude Code, but it's not the only way. You can also use Claude Code as an extension inside Visual Studio Code, the same IDE that we're using in this course. And you can use Claude Code inside the Claude desktop application, which includes both a chat interface, co-work, and a Claude Code interface. So one question you might have is, why are we using the terminal and not either the extension or the Claude Code desktop application? There's a few different reasons. One is that the extension is always behind the terminal and the application on features. So new features are going to come out on the terminal application, and the extension and the application are always going to be behind. Second, the desktop app is just known to have lots of issues and hiccups that come up. It doesn't seem to be as well supported as the command line interface. This is in contrast to Codex, another coding agent, which is run by OpenAI, in which the desktop app is very good and is my recommended interface. However, with Claude Code, I still do recommend the terminal. Maybe in a few months this changes, but for now, the terminal is the best interface. And finally, as you get more sophisticated with Claude Code, you're going to want to be able to have multiple Claude Code sessions at once, perhaps parallelizing work within a project, across project. And if you're using Claude Code from within VS Code, you'll find that it's very memory hungry. And that becomes a constraint on your computer then when you're using Claude Code. So the way in which I'm going to teach you to use Claude Code is using the terminal. It's a little bit intimidating when you're first getting started, but I'm going to teach you just the basics you need to be able to use it. And once you have those basics down, it's going to be very easy for you. What I want to do next is take you through some essential terminal commands, some very basic commands which will help you navigate the terminal. And there's really only 3 commands I need you to know. These are cd, which stands for change directory, ls, which stands for list, to list all the files that are in a directory, and pwd, which stands for the present working directory. By far, the most important is going to be cd, because that's what's going to help you navigate to the directory in which you want to do work with Claude Code. So let's start with cd. Here, I've got a new terminal. And so right now, I'm in the downloads folder, but what's the exact location where I am in this terminal? The way I would figure that out is by typing in pwd to see that my present working directory is users/Aniket Panjwani, my home username, and then in downloads. So now what I'm going to do is navigate to a different directory because this isn't where I want to be using Claude Code. So first, I'm going to go down one level to users/Aniket Panjwani. The way I'm going to do that is with cd ... There. And now if I type in present working directory again, we see that I've gone down one level. But I may not know what all the folders and files are that are on this level. If I want to see them, I'm going to type in ls, which is going to let me list all the files. And now I can scroll and see that there's all sorts of folders that are available, like documents, downloads, etc., and also a bunch of random files that I've got sitting around here. Now, where I like to put my projects is right here in project. So I'm going to go into that projects directory by doing cd, and then if I just do pr and press tab, it's going to complete the rest of that folder name because it sees that there's nothing else that would qualify for PR from this directory other than projects. So that's very convenient when you're trying to navigate to a directory or target a file, which has a very long name or hard to type name. And so if I do cd projects now and then do ls again, now I can see all sorts of folders that I have in. And so what I want to do now is make a new directory for maybe some tasks that I'm going to do in this course. So I'm going to say mkdir, which is for make directory, and then Claude Code course. And now I'm going to cd change into this directory. cd, and I just do CLAU and then tab, and I'm able to get to Claude Code course. I type in pwd, and now I see that that's where I am. So really just 4 commands that I need you to know for now: cd, mkdir, pwd, ls. And they all sort of roll off the tongue in terms of being very related to things you'd want to do. So hopefully that makes them relatively easy to remember. And now if I start Claude in this directory, whenever I ask it to now make some files or do some things, it's going to do that in this directory. If we come back here to VS Code now, we'll see that that exercise we were doing earlier, it created a really big HTML file for this project that we had been working on, Unikate's site redesign. But now I may want to work on a different project. And so to do that, I'll go here, File, Open Folder, and then navigate over here to Claude Code Course. So right now, this directory is empty. There's nothing in it, but we'll put things in it over time. Awesome. So now you have a basic familiarity with the terminal, which is the environment in which we're running Claude Code, and how you can use VS Code to open up files that Claude Code creates in your project directories. Now, I'm going to give you an introduction to the Claude Code interface, all the different most important toggles that there are in the interface, how you use them, what they mean. All right, so we're here in the Claude Code interface, and the first thing I want to show you is that if you just type in / you're going to see all sorts of different things that pop up. Now, some of these things that pop up are going to be defaults that are available to everybody that's using Claude Code, even if they're using it in a completely new session. And some of the things that pop up here are going to be skills, which are custom-made automations that somebody has come up with for their particular project or on their particular computer. So you can see a bunch of these skills that are popping up in the first few / commands here. The first / command that I want to show you is usage, because as I mentioned, depending on what plan you use, you're going to have different usage limits. And something you're going to want to know is how close are you to hitting your weeks or your daily sessions usage limits. And so you type in /usage and then press enter. And I can see here that I've used 4% of my usage in the current session and 5% across the entire week. This is going to reset in about 5 days. And then if I want to exit this, I press escape, which is what I'm going to press right here. Very good. A next important thing that I want you to see over here is that there's a particular model that's identified, Opus 4.6. There's a particular context window here that's specified. This describes how much you can use Claude Code in a given session before you sort of have to reset or compact what you're doing with Claude Code. If I come here and type in context, that's going to help me visualize these limitations that you have with Claude Code. And so we see here that I have 1 million tokens available. You can think of a token as being roughly a word, or like some words which are bigger will get split into multiple tokens. And whenever we're using Claude Code in a given session, there's a limit of how many tokens we can use. So all these little dots over here are kind of like the remaining space that we have. But certain bits of these squares have already been taken up or used or allocated by certain other things. What are these things? Well, one of those things is something called the system prompt, which is a set of instructions that Claude Code has all the time, basically saying, hey, don't let this person make nuclear weapons or whatever with this tool, and all sorts of other instructions. There's also system tools available. So these are the tools that give Claude Code the ability to read and write files on your computer, for example. There's custom agents. There's skills, which are an important concept, which I'm going to be talking about and which we've already used, for example, with that front-end design skill. Then there's the messages. That's like the actual conversation that happens here. And then there's free space. So we have 950,000 tokens of free space. But let's hone in a little bit on messages. What does that exactly mean? When you use Claude Code, you're going to be telling Claude Code various instructions. And so that's going to go into your messages. But then Claude Code is going to give you back a response to whatever messages you give it. That's also going to take up Claude Code's context. Now, in order to do things, Claude Code may need to read files on your computer. When it's reading files on your computer, that's going to also take up more tokens. And if it's reading a bigger file or a big PDF, that'll take up more tokens than a small file or a small PDF. Sometimes Claude Code may have to access information from outside systems, and you'll have to give it access to tools to be able to do that. So for example, later on in this course, we're going to give Claude Code the ability to access your full email system. And then in order to have access to the tools, simply to know about the tools is kind of taking up a brain space for Claude Code. But then also to be able to access your emails is taking up additional space for Claude Code, because for every email it reads, it's like it's a file on your computer, or a message that you've just given it, it's treated exactly the same. Now, something worth saying is that as you use Claude Code more and you're getting closer to using that 1 million tokens limit that you have available for it, its performance gets worse. That's kind of what this graph is talking about. And as you can see, older models like Sonnet 4.5 did a really bad job according to this mean match ratio measure of being able to perform well as the number of input tokens, the amount that you're talking to Claude Code, got more and more. But very recently, with Opus 4.6 and Sonnet 4.6, the performance, even when these conversations gets really long, has been getting better and better. So you don't have to care as much as you did in the past of having a really long Claude Code session. But it's still something to be aware of. It might be the case that in graphs like this, Anthropic is kind of cooking the books and not showing the full set of cases how performance drops off when you have a long session. And I'll talk about strategies about how to deal with that. It's just something to be a little bit aware of right from the get-go. Now, one thing that happens when you're using Claude Code is that once you start using up all of this space up till this point right here, you see that there's a little bit of the end that's already allocated off. And this says auto compact buffer 33K tokens. So what exactly is that? Well, when you hit your limit in a Claude Code session, what Claude Code is going to try to do is go through a process called compaction. And so it's going to take all this stuff that's completely filled up the maximum limit of what the session can have, and it's going to try to create a summary, along with some references to important files and key decisions that have been made in this process, and then let you start over again. So something quite common when you're working is that you may have new ideas or you're working through some things, and some of the things that you were initially doing are not necessarily relevant for what you are continuing to do. And so what Claude Code is going to try to do in this compaction process is just find the most relevant bits to whatever you need to do next and give that to the next Claude Code session to start working again in the next session. All right, so that was a very basic introduction to the Claude Code interface. But as you're going along with this tutorial, you may have other questions about Claude Code, either to clarify on what I'm discussing here, or about new things that come about in Claude Code, because Claude Code keeps getting updated and having new features and changes basically every week. So how can you keep up with the latest updates to Claude Code? What you're going to need in order to do that is a tool called Claude Code Guide. Claude Code Guide comes built in with Claude Code, and if you ever need to understand something in Claude Code, you can simply ask Claude Code, hey, I don't understand the difference between skills and MCPs. Can you explain them to me with Claude Code Guide? And so I used a voice-to-text tool, which I'm going to explain to you soon, to be able to do that. And you can see that now it's instantiated Claude Code Guide and is going through the Claude Code documentation to find an explanation of the difference between these two concepts, skills versus MCPs. And then it's going to come back to me with that explanation. So let's just wait a second and see what it gives us. So we see that it used this tool called Claude Code Guide. That tool had 4 tool uses, which I guess were each tool use was a lookup of one Claude Code documentation website. That used up 45.6K tokens, and that took 26 seconds. An important little detail here is that these 45.6K tokens occurred in the context of a Claude Code Guide subagent. So when we go back, and first we got this really good answer out, right? But if we go back and look at context, and I scroll up here to messages, we see that in the messages, there aren't 45.6K tokens that have been used. There's just 15.8, which are corresponding to, all of this stuff that was just done. And the reason why it looks a lot lower than you might think is that this occurred in the context of an isolated sub-instance of Claude Code called a subagent. And so that's a concept that we're going to get to and be using a lot later in the course, but just something I wanted you to be aware of. So you can ask Claude Code Guide to give you very detailed answers to questions about Claude Code, and it's not going to be that expensive to you in your Claude Code session. And we've got this very nice explanation here about what the difference is between these two things, skills and MCPs, which we'll also get into in much more detail later in the course. Now, one thing you may have seen just now is that I spoke to Claude Code to give it instruction. And so the next thing we're going to talk about is voice mode and Wispr Flow. In my opinion, voice is an essential, not an optional aspect of using Claude Code. The tool I like to use is Wispr Flow. I can use it on my phone. I can use it with other tools like Codex, but Claude Code also has its own inbuilt voice mode. So if you don't want to pay for Wispr Flow like I have, you don't have to. The reason voice mode is so important is that Claude Code does much better when you give it more and better context. When you're typing, you can give Claude Code about 40 words per minute, an average typing speed, but when you're speaking, you can give Claude Code 150 words per minute, which is an average speaking speed. So that's 4 times more context. So if you speak rather than type, because it's less costly, you're going to be just more willing to say more about whatever issue or problem or thing it is that you're trying to research. That's going to then help Claude Code give you better results. So I'm here in the terminal. I'm going to go to my downloads folder. Let's open up Claude, and then I'm going to type in voice, and you'll see this thing come up here which says toggle voice mode. So let's do that. I actually already had it on, so I'm going to toggle it again. And now you see it says hold space to record. So let's try it out. I want your help thinking about how to safely go about cleaning up my downloads folder. I haven't taken a look at it in a while. Maybe help me identify any files which you think are old, big, worth getting rid of to clean up space, but let's do it safely. So I don't want you to go off and delete anything until I tell you should delete it. So Claude Code is pretty smart. And so if it was tackling this problem, even without the additional instructions I was giving it, it would probably go about and do this in a safe manner. But because I had the ability to easily and quickly give that additional context, I was able to pin this down and really force Claude Code's hand to do this in a safe way. So it's not going to go off now and just delete things without me asking. And so it's taken everything I have here and sorted it by categories in terms of types of things that are taking up a lot of space. So I think what I want it to do is don't delete subtitles too, but everything else is okay. Enter. And that's it. Now it's going to give me a confirmation list, and then we'd be able to go off in it. Now, one thing you may have noticed is that while Claude Code was working there, it was asking me for permissions to do each individual thing. And that leads us to our next topic, permissions. By default, for each individual new type of task that Claude Code is doing, other than reading a file in your directory, it's going to ask you for permission before it does that. And that can be a good thing, especially with the kind of task to which I just put Claude Code to delete files from my downloads folder, because I don't want it deleting things without asking me first in most cases. But simultaneously, a lot of the appeal of Claude Code is getting it to autonomously do things for you without you having to be there manually monitoring the keyboard. So it would be nice if there was some way to safely let those guardrails off and let Claude Code do its thing without going off and crashing your computer. Claude Code actually has a permissions system which is going to solve this problem for us. Let me show you. All right, so we're here in the terminal. I'm going to type in Claude. And what you're going to see here is that as you type in Shift-Tab, there's different modes that come on and we cycle between them. So what's the difference between these different modes? In the current mode that we're in, the default mode, Claude Code is going to ask you the first time it uses any tool and also when it's editing a file. Here, in Accept Edits On, now it's going to be able to edit files just in this directory, not in other directories. And in this mode, Plan mode, Claude Code can only write files. It can't even create new files. And as a default, a good practice sometimes is to use plan mode when you're thinking about a complicated thing that you want to do, and then switch to one of the other modes to execute it. But what you'll see here is that YOLO mode, or the mode in which Claude Code can just do anything, doesn't exist in here by default. And so if you want to enable that, what you can do is use a command, update config, which I think we've already talked about. And then let's go into voice mode and ask it, can you help me update my configuration? Let's say just in this project so that we use bypass permissions on or YOLO mode by default. And so what it's doing now is looking for this settings file. Then it's going to set bypass permissions to be on just for this project. And now we'll be able to do anything in this project without needing to go through Claude Code's permission system. So if I go here now and I type in Claude again, you'll see this prompt come up saying it's running in bypass permissions mode and that this should be only used in a sandbox container. And so the types of things that this will now enable is the creation of new directories, creation of new files, editing of any file, let Claude Code run any code, see its output, and then act on that, interact with external systems, etc. And that's amazing because now Claude Code can work much more autonomously. But the cost is that it can work much more autonomously. So how do we protect Claude Code from doing damage potentially to your file system? This leads us to our next concept, hooks. Hooks are commands that you can set to automatically run at certain parts of Claude Code's workflow. The main reason you might want a hook is for safety reasons, which is what I'm going to show you. But also they help for certain kinds of automation, such as notifying you when Claude Code needs your input, or quality gates, making sure that the code that Claude Code is creating or the output that Claude Code is creating meets some standard of quality before you let it move forward. Here's a few of the different kinds of hooks that Claude Code uses. So the first one here is a pre-tool use hook, which runs before Claude uses a tool. And so, for example, using a tool which I'm going to help you install called Destructive Command Guard, there will be a hook in place to prevent Claude Code from ever deleting any kind of directory, or to prevent edits to certain types of files that you wouldn't want it to edit autonomously. You can also have post-tool use hooks. So these are after Claude Code executes some tool. These are helpful, for example, to auto-format your code anytime Claude edits a file. You can have a stop hook. This is when Claude finishes responding. You may want it to notify you. You can even set it to send you a text, for example, when Claude is ready for you to give your input. And then there's session start hooks that run when you start a new session. I don't find these that helpful, and they're kind of the same as a CLAUDE.md, which I also don't find to be a super helpful concept. And lastly, there's user prompt submit hooks, which may run to prevent you from entering any kind of input that you shouldn't into Claude's input window. My general advice is to not overthink hooks as a beginner. I'm going to show you a set of hooks that you should install them, and then never think about hooks again. They're kind of an advanced concept. They don't add a ton of value relative to other things you could be focusing on, but you're going to hear about them, so I want you to be aware of them. One set of hooks that I do want you to use are those defined by this tool, Destructive Command Guard, created by a fellow. His name is Jeffrey Emanuel. His handle here is Dicklesworth-Stone. And basically what it does is prevent AI coding agents from running certain catastrophic commands like resetting a Git repository, deleting directories, or dropping tables, destroying hours of work in seconds. And so he has all sorts of really nice stuff set up that you don't really need to be bothered by. All you need to do is come over here, copy this command, go back to your terminal, paste it in, and press enter. And his installer is going to handle the whole installation process for you. And so what this means is that you can set up Claude Code like I have it to use YOLO mode all the time by default. And you can feel relatively protected at some level of security that Claude Code is simply unable to use that power to do dangerous commands to your version control system, which I'll talk about later, but also to your directory. So you're not accidentally going to drop an important directory now that you didn't want Claude Code to delete because it's not going to be able to do that anymore. All right. New outfit, new topic. Let's talk about the Claude.md. The Claude.md is a file which Claude reads before it starts working on your project. You can think of it like a note for a coworker on what they should know before starting work on a project they've never seen before. Now, Claude.mds can be defined at different levels. So the most common is that you just, in your project, will put a Claude.md file at the root level of your directory. And so then those instructions will get read by Claude before it starts working on that project. But you can also put a Claude.md in a particular folder of your project with instructions specific to that folder, or in your system.claude directory in your home folder, you can have a Claude.md, which will get read by Claude Code when it begins working on any project at all. But here's my honest advice. If you're a beginner, and even if you're not, just don't make a Claude.md. Now, this may seem like shocking or counterintuitive advice because if you look at a lot of other Claude Code tutorials, they make out the Claude.md as this super important brain of your entire project that Claude Code needs to have in order to work well. But that's really antiquated advice at this point for a few reasons. First, when you as a beginner put things into your Claude.md, often what beginners will do is put lots of unnecessary things that Claude Code can figure out itself, and which are just creating unnecessary, useless tokens that you didn't need to spend to help Claude understand the project, because Claude Code itself is extremely smart, and so it can figure things out by itself. Second, there is a command called /init, which Claude Code can use to create its own Claude.md, but even then, the types of things that it will tend to put into the Claude.md were just unnecessary. The degree to which you need to give very step-by-step precise instructions starts to decrease for a lot of tasks. And for things like understanding a repo's structure and what's going on in a repo, Claude Code can just figure that out itself most of the time for the general repo level instructions. And third, and most importantly, what's often going to occur is that your repo will go out of date and you're not going to necessarily remember to update your Claude.md as your repo gets updated. And so there's going to be inconsistent sets of truth between this Claude.md, which has one set of instructions, and the repository, which has another set of instructions. That's going to create confusion. And so the Claude.md is a really ineffectual place from which to give general instructions about a repo. Really, you just shouldn't give those at all and let Claude Code infer those things from the structure of the repository. There are nuances to this, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But first, I want to show you some evidence for my claims. So this is from a paper from researchers at a university in Zurich, one of the best universities in Zurich, actually, in Switzerland, called Evaluating Agents.md, where they did a bunch of tests of different models. So these are older generations of models, but to see how their performance was when there's no agents.md or Claude.md. Agents.md is just the equivalent of Claude.md for Codex or Cursor or other tools, with a LLM generated agents.md, and then with a human generated agents.md. And what you see here is that performance is like pretty much the same for the model, which is most comparable to Claude Code, Sonnet 4.5. You actually see the best performance when there is no Claude.md either generated by an LLM or a human. The place where you see the most stark result is with this open source model, Qwen 330b, which by having a human-generated Claude.md or agents.md had significantly improved performance. And so that really maps to what we might have seen with the instruction to have a Claude.md, because Qwen 330b is probably similar in its level of power to the Claude 3.5, Claude 3.7 generation of models. And so in that generation of models, it may have been very important to handhold Claude and say, oh, this is a repo to do X. Make sure you look at this folder. Make sure you look at that folder. But now that's not really necessary because the models themselves are good enough, so we don't need to worry about this case anymore. Here's just one more view at the same question where the researchers did evaluations of two different software benchmarks, and they looked at these models depending on whether they had Claude.md generated or not, how many steps it took for the model to satisfy these benchmarks, and how much it cost. And what you see here for Sonnet 4.5, for example, is that consistently across these two benchmarks, it takes fewer steps and costs less than if you have LLM or human-generated Claude.mds to satisfy these benchmarks. And that actually basically holds across the board for all of these models. So when should you use a Claude.md, or what should you do instead? The only time when I use a Claude.md is if I see Claude Code systematically making some kind of error over and over again. Sometimes then I'll just tell Claude Code, hey, update the Claude.md to make sure that when you're running these tests, you always use this one tool that I like to use and not this other one. So that's one way to do it. But really, hold on a second, because the appropriate way to deal with all these problems that people are putting into their Claude.md are these concept of skill, which are these specific sets of instructions for particular things that you want Claude Code to do. And so in reality, if I was having trouble running tests for some application or some tool that I'm building, I would make that fix not at the level of the general Claude.md, but in my skill that I have for running tests. And you've seen the concept of skills already, so you know what they are, even though I haven't gone into that module yet, since you saw it in the context of the front-end design skill, which I use to make my own beautiful local version of my website, and which you can do right now too. But the general advice I have here is do not make a Claude.md. It's a concept that you have to be aware of, but it's something that has become not so important anymore. All right. Now, I want to move on to the 5 practical primitives which superpower Claude Code. Now, one of these we've already talked about fairly frequently, skills, which are these ready-made sets of instructions that you can use for certain specialized workflows. And often, under the hood, all of these different primitives are using command line interfaces. And so a command line interface is a tool like YTDLP, which you can use. It takes certain arguments, and then it does things based on those arguments. And so each of these skills, MCPs, plugins, and subagents are often under the hood just interacting with some command line interface. So if I have a YTDLP skill or like a YouTube analysis skill, under the hood, it's just doing some operations on the subtitles of YouTube videos using YTDLP, but then I have some instructions in my skill for which channels I want analyzed regularly, how I want them analyzed, what I want the final product to be. That all goes into the skill. The second primitive are MCPs, or Model Context Protocol Servers. These are a standard which has been created to allow all kinds of AI agents to get access to data from external systems. So tools that you might use like Google Workspace, Notion, Dropbox, all have created MCP servers that you can use to access your data. And I'll show you how Claude Code can hook up to some of these MCPs to access data. Now, a third fundamental concept are plugins. Now, you've already seen me install one plugin because the front-end design skill came as part of a plugin, and that sort of tells you a little bit about what plugins are. Plugins are community-created composites of all of these things, skills, MCPs, and subagents, which I'll talk about. And so what that allows is that if you in your business want to, for example, have everybody have the same sets of skills, subagents, and MCPs available to them, you can distribute that to your team as a plugin. Or if you want to make something available out of the goodness of your heart on the wider internet, you can also do that with a plugin. The last primitive are subagents, which are independent instances of Claude Code, which have their own individual 1 million token context. And that context doesn't use the context of your main 1 million context window. And so what that allows you to do, for example, is let's go back to the YouTube example. If you wanted to do an analysis across 100 YouTube videos, you could spin up 100 subagents to do those analyses and then just compile them all together without ever hitting your limits in your Claude Code session. Now, to show you how this can all be used practically and to ground it in reality, I'm going to take us to our next practical exercise where we hook up Claude Code to our Gmail, to our Google Drive, to all our Google Workspace. All right, so this is GWS. It's a command line tool that's been created to help you interact with your Google Workspace. So Drive, Gmail, Calendar, and every Workspace API. So I'm going to take you through all the steps to be able to use this and get it set up. So let's try it out. So first, there's a variety of installation procedures. If you'll recall, I had suggested that you install Homebrew. And so if you haven't done that, go over here to brew.sh and install it by copying this command, taking that to your terminal, pasting it in, and pressing enter. I'm going to assume it's set up. So let's just copy that and then go to your terminal, just paste it in and press enter. And then it should install this tool. All right, it's installed. Next, over here, it's got a quick start. So let's just go through that quick start and get it set up. So the first step here is GWS auth setup. So let's try that out. GWS auth setup, enter. And so it's found my Google account here. So I'll press enter. Now at this stage, what it's doing is setting up a Google Cloud Console project. And so usually when you're trying to interact with Google services, you have to enter an interface like this. And I have various projects already set up for various Google things that I'm doing. This is a very often confusing interface to work in, and this tool, GWS, makes the setup process a lot easier. And so what I recommend is going here to this option where I know that's small, but it says create new project. So let's try that. Enter. And then it's going to ask you the name, I guess. So I'll call it Claude Code or just Agentic GCP. Failed to create project because the project ID format is invalid. Must be 6 to 30 characters. Start with a lowercase letter. Use only lowercase letters, digits, or hyphens. All good. -GCP. All right. The project is created, and now it's asking me which APIs I want to enable. So if you look over here at the bottom, it says space toggle, enter, confirm, escape, cancel. So what you want to go through is all of these and basically press space for everything that you wanted to have access to. So I'm going to say sure for Google Drive, yes for Sheets, yes for Gmail, Calendar, Docs, Slides, Tasks. Yeah, that all looks good. I don't even know what Vault is. Sure, group settings. Reseller sounds sketchy. Licensing, I don't know about that. Classroom sounds okay. Forms, sure. Meet, sure. So I've decided I want to give this tool access to all these services. So now I'm just going to press enter. All right. So the last step it's asking for is to create an OAuth client. And so this step, which is what's going to let it finally interact with your Google account, is something that apparently needs to be done manually. And so the step A is doing this thing called creating a consent screen. So let's do that. we're just going to copy that URL, copy, and then I'm going to paste it in right here. Let's click Get Started. I'll call it again, Agentic GCP. For the user support email, I'll give my email, click Next. And then here, importantly, you got to click External, click Next. Here, again, I'm just going to put my email, Next, I agree, continue, create. All right, so now step 2, we have to create an OAuth client. So we're going to select this next link, copy it, paste it in. Now you go here, create credentials, and click on this button, OAuth client ID. Now for the application type, choose desktop apps, call it Agentic GCP client, create. And now here you can see a client ID and client secret. I'm going to blur this out because I don't want to tell you guys what it is. But importantly, here, you should do this, download the JSON. So that's going to contain this information in a JSON file. So I'm going to download that. There, it's now downloaded. But actually, this dialog is just asking you to paste them in. So let's do that instead. So I'll copy the client ID. I'll come back here, paste it in, press enter. I'll come back here, copy the client secret, go over here, paste it in, press enter. Now it's asking me, do you want to log in? I'm going to say yes. All right. So looks like setup is complete. It worked. So now it brought me to a screen where it's asking me for what permissions I want this tool to have across all these different things like chat, Drive, Gmail, etc. that I've given this tool access to. So for example, over here, you can see that right now the tool can send Gmail on my behalf. And so if I didn't want that, I could press space to toggle it off or space to toggle it on. And if I just wanted to give any access whatsoever, I could come up here and choose full access, just toggle that on. But what I'm going to do here is just choose the recommended ones, which in and of itself allows you apparently to do quite a lot, like see, edit, create, and delete all of your Google Drive files, read, compose, and send emails from your Gmail account. It doesn't really allow anything on chat. It does on your calendar, it does on your documents. So it's going to be what most of you want. So we can just do that for now. Now I'm going to press enter. Finally, it says open this URL in your browser to authenticate. So let's copy that, paste it in. Got to put in my email here. I forgot one step. You have to go to this audience tab. So we come back here to the auth platform. This is the overview for Agentic GCP. Come over to this audience tab. And here where it says test users, add your email address as a username. Then come here, copy this, paste it in, press enter. And then let me just show you, if I use one of my other email addresses, I'll log in. It's not going to let me through. But if I use this email address, then I'm going to arrive at this screen. Don't click back to safety, click continue again, click select all, click continue. Now it says you may close this window, go back to your terminal, and you'll see that this is now installed. All right, so we got this fancy tool set up, but we haven't done anything with it yet. How do we get Claude Code to use it? What we're going to do now is install a set of skills that'll teach Claude Code how to use this command line interface. So if I just take you briefly back to here, what we've done right now is installed a command line interface for Google Workspace, and now we're going to create a set of skills that teach Claude Code how to interact with that command line interface. To do that, we'll come back to this repo, and we're going to look at this part of the README that has all these AI agent skills configured. And so what I'm going to do first is just install these skills over here for Gmail, and then we'll try them out. So I'll go here, just copy that, come here, paste it, enter. I'll say yes. So it's automatically going to install them in the .agent/skills, which applies to all these agents, but you have to specify it specifically if you want it also for Claudes. So I'll go down, press space, press enter, and I only want this installed in this project just so it doesn't mess with my whole installation. But if you're really happy with this, You can choose to do this globally, and you could use this command instead, which is going to install all the skills at once for Gmail, Drive, Docs, Calendar, and Sheets. But right now, I'll just do it for this project. I'll press enter. You can just choose this first one, and I'll say yes. So now I'm going to type in Claude and press enter. And now over here, you can see this new skill here, GWS Gmail. Now, I already had a few other skills that I had made previously for email operations using a different similar command line interface tool. So that's why you see these. You wouldn't expect to see them in your own installation. But at this point, you should now see GWS Gmail. So let's try that out. And let's use voice mode to interact with Claude Code. Can you tell me how many emails I've gotten each of the last 7 days? All right, so my email volumes, about 74 on weekdays and 33 on weekends. Now, part of what's interesting is the process it went along. So initially, it didn't know the arguments here to this tool, so it didn't really do them properly. Then it was able to figure out how to run the queries in some way, but it was getting a weird result of 0 emails. And then finally, it went along, debugged itself that there's some user ID parameter it needs to pass. And then finally, it was able to get this result. And so we see that the default skill that's created to help us interact with Google Workspace has some problems. It doesn't work perfectly. So we could improve upon that. But before we do that, which we're going to do, we should learn a little bit systematically about what skills are. And so that brings us to our next topic, skills. First, what are skills? I'm going to give you 2 definitions, an intuitive one and then a more technical and precise one. An intuitive definition of skills is that these are instructions that we give to Claude Code to help it learn to do specific things in a way that we want it to do every single time. So we've already seen a few examples of skills like the front-end design skill that you can invoke anytime that you want Claude Code to help you design a website in a way that doesn't create just a generic AI vibe. I've personally created over 100 skills, and I'm making new ones and updating the old ones every single day. This is a skill that I use with my team to work on Jira. We use Jira for project management, and this skill lets me automate all the operations in Jira without ever having to actually open it up in my web browser. Here's a skill that I've created to use the Remotion library to help me generate graphics for my YouTube channel. So on my YouTube channel, you'll see a lot of title cards, definition box, stats, sometimes terminals, and these are being created by AI via Claude Code or Codex. This is one of my favorite skills. Every single time that I have a meeting, I have a Fathom recorder, which will come to that meeting, but then I grab that transcript and I put it in a central location on my computer. Then whenever I want to do a search across all those transcripts, I use this Fathom research skill to use a tool called QMD, which facilitates fast search, to be able to search in that defined location in my external hard drive across all these meeting transcripts. You've now got an intuitive sense of what skills are and what they can do, but what's the technical definition? And you do need to know this to be able to use skills effectively. A skill is a folder with a file, skill.md, which has in its front matter at the top of the file a name and description field, and which has optional references, scripts, and other assets in the folder. Those first 2 fields, the name and the description, are extremely important because that's all that Claude Code sees initially when it boots up to know whether the rest of a skill is important to investigate. To show you why this is important, let's take a look at a fresh Claude Code session. So if I type in context and then go take a look at what's taking up our context right now, we see that there's been no messages. So you just have 8 tokens right here taken up by messages. But we see here that 9.1k tokens, or 1% of the context, is being taken up by skills now. And so the reality is that I have tons of skills. All of these right now are different skills, either in installed at the user level or at the project level. But many of these skills might take up 9.1K tokens on their own. So if you look here, this skill right now is pretty long. Like that might be several thousand tokens in and of itself. But when Claude Code starts up, it's not reading all of this. All it's reading is this title and this description. Here we can see it again, the name and the description. It doesn't see anything else when it's starting up. Then, if you explicitly tell it to use this skill, or if based on the messages that you're communicating with Claude Code, it seems to think that this is the appropriate skill to use, then it's going to read everything else in the skill. So this is an important aspect of using Claude Code generally, in that we're always trying to protect that context window, not use tokens that we don't need to use. And skills are a tool that help us do that. And skills have this concept embedded in them called progressive disclosure, where you're only seeing more of the skill as it's necessary to do so. And in doing so, you're not filling up the context window with lots of irrelevant things. Next, there's a few additional things that I want to teach you about skills. First, I want to teach you how to install skills that you may find on the internet or pass to you just by email, for example. And I want to show you the two different levels that they can be installed at the project level or at the user level. And third, I want to show you how to make your own skills. So as you remember, we installed this Google Workspace CLI, and then we were able to install some skills to interact with that CLI. But we found some problems in the process of working with those default skills. So I want to show you how to make your own skills, which do very custom things with CLIs or just on your own computer, so that you can have processes automated that fit your particular needs. So an even more primitive question is, how do you find skills? Now, this is Anthropic's skills repository. And in this, Anthropic, the creators of Claude Code, have made a lot of default skills. And as you can see here, they give you instructions to be able to install all the skills that they have in this repository, which is functionally equivalent to the meaning of a marketplace. But what if you wanted to find a specific skill? Where could you go to find that? My general recommendation is, one, you can just Google for a skill. So let's say I wanted to look up Notion skills Claude. Then you'll see here that there's a bunch of different skills that just random people have made that will show up. And one option is you could simply point Claude Code at this skill and install it yourself. However, what you'll find is that a lot of these skills that you see here are pretty old. They may not actually be made up to par, and it's not that hard to make your own skills, as I'll show you in just a little bit. But if you want to find skills, be inspired for them, my main recommendation is just Google for them. That's the best way to do it. Now, let's say you find a specific skill. So we come into this skill repository and we see here that there's a PDF skill. And so let's take a look at what it looks like. Let's actually look at it raw so you guys can see under the hood what it looks like. So here you can see the name of the skill is PDF. So that's how you're going to invoke it. And if I zoom in, it says, use this skill whenever the user wants to do anything with PDF files. This includes reading or extracting text/tables from PDFs, because something you'll notice when working with Claude Code or Codex with PDFs is that their initial tendency is to not read an entire PDF or process it properly. And so you'll get incomplete interpretations of PDFs. And so we see here in the formatted version that basically what this skill is doing is suggesting some Python libraries which are good for working with PDFs, for extracting data from PDFs, and it gives little snippets that Claude Code will be aware of now that it has this skill and be able to use. It also gives suggestions for command line tools, which might be installed on your computer, and has a quick reference here. And so another thing that you see is that the skill.md is just one element of what the skill is. And then if we go over here to forms.md, there's a separate set of instructions on how to deal with fillable forms in PDFs. And here in the reference.md, there's a bunch of additional information about specific libraries, but it's not in this skill.md. So when Claude Code starts up, the first thing it's going to do is add this to the context, the name and the description. So that's only going to be like 50 or so tokens, and it's not going to take up a ton of space. Then if you say something about wanting to handle or deal with PDFs, then Claude Code is going to go on and read the rest of this file. And this file is a little bit long, but it's not super long, right? Like maybe it's 1,000 or 1,500 tokens. And so maybe for what you need Claude Code to do, this rest of the file is enough for it to be able to effectively do things. But if what you're asking is about filling out a PDF form, or you need to do something which depends on JavaScript libraries and detailed examples, then and only then will Claude Code go over here to reference.md. Now, a last piece we see here is a folder scripts, which contains a bunch of Python scripts that accompany the skill. And so here in the forms.md, we see that there are instructions to run various scripts here that we've already predefined for helping effectively fill in fields into PDFs. And so this is a way in which you can sort of limit or constrain a skill to work in a particular way every time, rather than only having free-form text instructions. You can have it create these Python scripts, for example. And so this is what this Python script looks like. And so you might be looking at this and thinking, wow, this is going to be really difficult. I don't know Python. But what I'm going to show you is that with the skill creator skill, which is right here, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, you're going to be able to make your own skills. And the skill creator skill will, of its own accord, be able to help you with making all these choices of, should you split up the skill into multiple markdown files? Should there be a reference? Should there be scripts that the skill can potentially call? That kind of thing. So you don't need to know about programming really to be able to make good skills that are split up in this way. I just want to show you how they look like. And so coming back to this PDF skill now, the way to install it is pretty easy. So I would just copy this, then come over to Claude Code, and I'm just going to ask it, can you install this skill in this project at the project level? That's it. So just to show you guys right now, if I go /PDF right now, nothing comes up. There's some other skill I have that's different, but nothing's coming up. And so just by doing this and specifying specifically that I want it at the project level, not across all my projects, Claude Code is going to be smart enough to grab all the relevant files and directories now from GitHub and get the skill installed in this project. And so we have this project right now open in VS Code. And what's going to happen is that there's going to be a new directory made here called PDF in the .claude directory in this project. And so once that's done, we'll be able to use this PDF skill from this project. All right, so the skill got installed. It says it's installed at the project level and all 12 files are in place. The skill is already showing up in my available skills list as PDF. So we'll go like this, PDF, and we can see that that skill is now here. If I come in here to VS Code now and I look under skills, we see that this PDF skill comes up and it's exactly the same as it was on GitHub. Here I've got a gigantic PDF. This is an economics paper. And so let's see how this PDF skill does at helping us understand this PDF. Explain this to me like I'm 5 years old. Let's see how it does. While that's working, something else I want to show you guys is that this skill is not going to be available in other projects. So if you remember, to navigate this terminal, we use CD. So I'm going to use that to go to my projects directory. And then let me do ls to see what files there are. There's this Claude Code course. So I'm going to make a new directory with mkdir called Claude Code course temp. And then I'm going to cd into that directory. Then let me just clean things up. And now remember to see what directory you're in. We can do pwd. Okay, that's where we are. So if I type in Claude now in this directory and I do /pdf, nothing comes up because we didn't install this skill, this PDF skill, at the user level. We just installed it at the project level. And so let me get out of this. You get out of Claude Code by pressing Control-C twice quickly. And then I'm going to cd to my home directory. You do that with a tilde. So let's go there. And then I'm going to go into the .claude directory, which is in my home directory. So let me go in there, cd .claude, and then I'll go cd skills, and now I'll do ls. And you can see that there's a ton of different skills that I have here, which I've defined at the user level because I want them to be available wherever I am, regardless of which particular project I'm working on. And so an example of one such skill is my Slack skill. And so I'll open it up here. And this is a skill which I made to help me read, search, and send Slack messages. So this is the kind of skill that I would want to be available all the time when I'm using Claude Code, not necessarily just in one particular project. All right, so they downloaded this paper, used this PDF skill, and then explained this paper to me like I'm 5 years old. It seems a little bit more complicated than a 5-year-old explanation, but at least it's moving generally in the right direction. All right, so let's say you install a skill, but you actually didn't want it. How do you remove the skill? One option is you can just come here, wherever your skill is installed, and simply delete it. And so that's what I'm going to do right now. Let me delete this. I'm going to say move to trash. Okay, the skill is gone. I come back, and that doesn't work anymore. I'm in the same directory, but I can't find the skill because it doesn't exist anymore. The next thing I want to teach you guys is how to make your own skills. And it's a lot easier than you might think. So if you recall earlier, I had you install this marketplace and this plugin. And so if you haven't do that, go through those steps again. You just copy this, go back to your terminal, paste it, press enter, then copy this one for Anthropic agent skills, example skills, paste it, press enter. So for me, it says it's already installed globally, but I had disabled it. So I'm going to go here to my plugins, then press tab to navigate the space. And then I'm going to go here to example skills. And you can see that right now it says it's disabled. So I want to enable it. I'm going to press enter. And then I'm going to say enable plugin. And now it says run reload plugins to apply. So I'm going to do that. Now it's been reloaded. After you reload, I want you to do Control-C twice to exit Claude Code. Then just type in Claude again to enter it again. And you'll see now that that PDF skill that we had previously installed manually is now available again as part of this example skills plugin. And if I come here to the Claude Code course temp directory and I type in Claude and then I go PDF, we'll see that it shows up here. And the reason it shows up here is that this skill is now installed as part of a plugin, which is in a marketplace, the Anthropic Skills Marketplace. So this is getting a little bit ahead to concepts that we'll be talking about in more detail later, but I wanted to show you that you can install this same skill instead of installing a single one, just install all of them as part of a plugin. And now coming back here, you'll see that there's this one skill called a skill creator skill, which was installed as part of this plugin. One question you might have is, where do these plugins actually live on your file system? I'll show you. So let's go here to File. We'll go to Open Folder, and I'll come here down to my home folder, and you'll see here that the .claude directory is not visible anywhere. That's because by default in your Finder, the hidden directories and hidden files aren't visible. So I'm going to make them visible. And the way you do that is with Command-Shift-period. So let me do that right now. And now we see that there's a bunch of directories that just showed up. Here's .claude. Let me go inside. Then inside .claude, there's this directory plugins. So let's go inside there. Then inside plugins, there's marketplaces. And you'll see here that there are various other marketplaces that are also in here. The one I care about is this one that we just installed, Anthropic Agent Skills. And then we go here inside skills, and we see that this PDF skill is here, but also this skill creator skill is in here. So let me open this up right now. I'm going to say, yes, I trust the authors. And then we'll open up this skill creator skill so that you can see what this does. It's called the skill creator skill, and it's used to create new skills, modify and improve existing skills, and measure skill performance. Used when users want to create a skill from scratch, edit, or optimize an existing skill. And this skill itself is really long. It gives a lot of advice to Claude Code on how to interpret the kind of vague questions or vague desires that humans often want. It helps Claude Code understand what the structure of the skill.md has to be. This idea that there can be the skill.md and also bundled resources. So skills are not just single files. And it explains this idea of progressive disclosure, where the name and description are always in context and should be about 100 words. But then the skill.md body only becomes in context when the skill triggers, and the resources come into context as they're needed. And so it defines a lot of ideal principles to be able to make the skills. You don't have to understand these at a great level of detail, but if you're ever kind of confused about what the skill creator skill does, you can always come in here, read through this, and you'll probably learn a lot about how to make skills. But from our perspective, we're just going to use it to try to make a better email reading skill. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say /skill creator. I want to make a new skill to read my email. I want it to improve on what GWS Gmail does. That skill often has errors when it's used. It's not super streamlined. Maybe I want you to take a look at my email and think of workflows I might want in the skill, like getting inquiries for my YouTube channel and dealing with them, consulting clients, getting rid of spam or unwanted newsletters, that kind of thing. So when I do this, it's going to invoke this skill creator skill, and it's also going to look at this GWS Gmail skill that we had installed earlier, and it's going to use it to look through my emails. So hopefully that email connection that we set up with GWS still works. And if it does, it should be able to now read through my emails, get a sense of what there is, and help me think about the workflows that I'm going to want to have in a skill for managing my email in my personalized way. And so a lot of people will go off and look for skills to download, but I think that that's poorly conceived, because this skill creator skill makes it pretty easy to make very personalized skills to yourself. And so that's what I recommend most of the time when you're thinking about needing a new skill. Don't go out and just download or, God forbid, buy a skill. There's plenty of hucksters trying to sell their optimized skill packs. I actually shouldn't go that far. There's at least a couple people who sell skills who I approve of, and I would buy their skills because they're just very intelligent people, and it saves me time and saves me money and makes me money. But most of the time, for most of you, I would just say make your own skills like we're doing right now. All right. So it found a lot of different stuff in my real inbox because we had used this tool GWS to connect to my actual inbox, and it's finding a lot of stuff that looks like spam, some stuff from my community, some tools, newsletters, this OctoRocket notifications, this annoying thing that comes up from a client. And then I have people who want to sponsor me on YouTube. So those people reach out to me. And so now it's asking me for some follow-up questions, and I'm just going to answer them. They are a consulting client, but I don't want those notifications. To the local newsletters, you can unsubscribe from all of them. 3, it can just handle content.quant.io for now. 4, yeah, both draft responses and flag and categorize them. So it's gone into my actual email using that basic GWS email skill, and now it's finding things that are particular to me on the basis of which I'm going to be able to have a skill that's curated for my particular needs. All right, so it thought a little bit. Let's go actually read the initial skill it's made. And so it put the skill here in the .agents/skills directory, which is an alternative directory from which Claude Code can read skills. So let's go over here to Email Manager and give it a read. So it says smart email management specifically for Aniket@contentquant.io using the GWS command line interface. Triages inbox into priority buckets, handles YouTube sponsorship inquiries. So we see that it's a lot more detailed than the general GWS skill, which we can also see over here, which just says Gmail, send, read, and manage email. So it's going to be a lot more useful to us than that other skill is. And it also has done some information, added some information about GWS as needed, some kind of authentication type problems that might show up. And now it's created 3 workflows, one for triaging my email, a second one specifically for YouTube sponsorship handling, and then a third one for newsletter and spam cleanup. And so if we go here, the next step that it's suggesting is to try out some test cases, check my email, deal with that sponsorship email, clean up my newsletters. So that looks like a good set of test cases. So I'll say, sure, that looks right. Now, what it's doing is it's doing some test runs to see how well these different workflows that is proposed creating actually work. So here it's doing these evaluations to see how the skill improves the process of either dealing with sponsorships or doing newsletter cleanup. When this evaluation process is done, you'll see something like this come up on your screen, which shows you for the different things that you asked it to do, how it does with and without the skill. It'll also open up something like this on your web browser, where you can see for different evaluations that were done, the outputs of the evaluations and how it does on various benchmarks. Now, this is getting pretty complex, and for your purposes as beginners, I don't need you to think too much in detail about what you're seeing here on this screen. You can always use this kind of evaluation process to iterate on the skill, but I would just say at this point, it looks good, let's lock it in. And that's how you now have a skill created. So let's test it out. I'm going to try it out. Got email. All right, so it looks like the skills have been placed in the wrong directory. And so I asked Claude Code to move it into this other .claude directory. And so this .agents directory is what other frameworks like Codex or Cursor, if you use, will recognize. But for some reason, it wasn't showing up. I guess Claude Code, even though it made it in the .agents directory, still didn't recognize it. So now it's going to put it here into this email manager directory, and then we should be able to see this skill that we've made. So I'm going to do email manager now, and it does show up. So I'm going to ask it, can you find other newsletters for me to unsubscribe from? And let's see how it works. So I asked it to do that. It was able to do this command with no issues whatsoever. It mentioned that it's already unsubscribed me from some newsletters, but then it found a bunch of others to potentially unsubscribe me from. But it didn't do that unsubscribing right away. It first asked me, do you want to unsubscribe these? Here are some that you might want to keep. Which ones should I actually unsubscribe you from? So that's a pretty well-designed skill. I didn't have to specify it that way because obviously I wouldn't want it to go off and start unsubscribing me without me permitting that. So I'm pretty happy with how this skill creation process went. You see that there's sometimes little hiccups along the way, but overall, it's a pretty straightforward process. All right, we've discussed skills, and now I want to move on to MCPs. MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. It's an open source standard for connecting AI applications to external systems. Before skills came around, MCP was the primary way in which tools like Claude or ChatGPT, and then later Claude Code, would interact with external systems. So tools like Notion, Jira, the project management tool, and also Google services have MCP support available so that you can connect to their systems using this MCP protocol. Now, one point of confusion you might have is, when would I use MCPs as opposed to skills or these CLIs that you keep talking about? And under the hood, these MCPs are often just a layer on top of some CLI. The reason why people have moved away from MCP and to skills has to do with this concept of progressive disclosure, which I introduced to you when we were talking about skills. Initially, Claude Code just sees that name and description field in a skill. Then it decides whether it's going to read the skill.md file, and only then does it go into the rest of the folder. The difference with MCP is that it enables similar things as what is possible with a skill, but it loads all the things at once. And so the folder, the markdown file, and the name and the description has to all get loaded at one time. This makes it often very inefficient to work with MCPs, and that's why most people have moved off using MCPs to using skills for everything. Now, Claude Code has introduced some capabilities to have this notion of progressive disclosure with MCPs, such as allowing you as the MCP server author to add a search tools tool. So you could use that to find the tool the MCP server defines, which is appropriate, instead of having to load every single tool into Claude Code's memory at once. MCPs can still be useful on occasion because many services make it extremely straightforward to be able to connect to that service's data if you're using MCP. Whereas skills often have at least a little bit of setup that's needed. So now as a demo, I'm going to connect live to the Notion MCP, show you how MCPs work practically in Claude Code, and how we can connect to our Notion database. For those of you who aren't familiar with Notion, it's basically an infinitely flexible CRM, personal knowledge tool. I use it for all sorts of things. Here, I have a database of all sorts of AI YouTubers, for example. But it would be nice if Claude Code was able to help me find more, find characteristics about them, maybe even like write individual profiles about these people, or create other databases, or help me understand across all my projects, like what exactly do I have in my Notion. All right, so here we are back in Claude Code. I'm going to enter into it with Claude. And if I want to see the MCPs, which I have available right now, I just type in /MCP. So let me do that and take a look. And as you can see, there's a bunch of MCP servers for various things like Slack. This is a database I use, another database I use, Google Calendar, etc., that I already have installed. If I press enter on one of these MCPs, and then I can choose to do various things. Like here, I can see the tools that are available associated with the MCP. So there's Get, Windows, and Tabs, Chrome Navigate. And so when Claude Code has an MCP server installed, it can see all these potential tools that are available with which it can interact with my Google Chrome instance. And so the tool has a tool name, a full name, and then a description that Claude Code can see to understand what it does. And so this is a little bit kind of like how skills work, right? There's very similar patterns that are being used in different places to work with agentic coding tools like Claude Code. So here, notably, we don't see a Notion MCP anywhere. So I'm going to now install and set up the Notion MCP. So here we see instructions on how to connect to the Notion MCP. Run this command in your terminal. So I'm just going to copy that. I'll come back to my terminal, and now I'm going to do Control-C 2 times to exit. Then I'll paste that command in. I'll press enter. Okay, it's been added. And this configuration file .claude.json just got modified. Now I'll open up Claude again, and then I'll go here, say MCP, and we see that it says here that Notion needs authentication. So let's get it set up. I'm going to press enter. I'll say authenticate. Now it's asking me to connect with Notion MCP. I'll say I recognize and trust this URL, continue, and now it's available. Let's try it out. Tell me what you can find in my Notion database. Press enter. So now it's using the Notion MCP to do some searching. Actually, just the entire workspace, not necessarily just a database. I got my terminology wrong, but okay. Okay, so it found a lot of different things, some old projects with a bunch of different databases I've created. It's even found things from 2002 and 2023, but it says the workspace appears to center around content creation. So let's try something else. Can you find the AI creators database? Okay, cool. So it found this AI content creators database. And now let me show you a cool possible thing that you can do, which is going to foreshadow another topic, which we're going to get to in a little bit, called subagents. Can you create a profile on each person's database entry who has a YouTube, spin up a subagent per person, and have YTDLP do research just on what kinds of videos that person produces using only their YouTube titles and descriptions, not the subtitles or anything else, to help make that profile. So what I'm going to see is, are we able to first have Claude Code find the people who have YouTube channels and then add sort of profile entries to each person about their YouTube channel? And so if that's possible, that's going to be pretty cool and a nice example of how we can not only get data from Notion, but also write data to Notion. And this subagent concept, which I'll get to a little bit, is one of those things that allows us to sort of scale with Claude Code much better than we otherwise could. Because what I'm hoping Claude Code does is basically in parallel across maybe 15 different creators, do this research independently and then update Notion with each Claude Code instance on its own, which is what a subagent is. So it seems to be working. I accidentally interrupted it, but it says here that it's spinning up 14 agents in parallel, one per creator, and that 14 out of the 16 creators have YouTube URLs. So pretty cool. Let's see how it goes. All right, so all these background agents are coming in and completing. It seems to have gotten a key focus. For some reason, a lot of these are labeled AI scammers. I don't really know why that is. Some of them I actually think are AI scammers, the one who I've got labeled so, and some I don't. It also says here that every creator with a YouTube URL now has a profile written to their Notion page. So let's ask it, can you give me all their Notion pages? So here are the types of profiles which are being created. So it found 3 videos for this guy, has a description of him, Riley Brown, who I like, Nick, who I like. A lot of these other people I don't like that much. Heavy clickbait, 2-phase channel, 21 videos. And if we actually go here now on Notion and I open this up, okay, so it's got like a much longer profile here. Let's take a look at some of these other ones. There, that's like a pretty long profile that's been created. Let's take a look at Nate. It's another pretty long, interesting profile. So I'm pretty happy with how that went. That was very successful. And I think that a lot of you guys using Notion out there wanting to do some kind of research at scale, this will be very helpful for you. All right. So I've shown you skills and how to make them. I've shown you what MCP servers are, how to connect to them, and how to use them. The next concept I want to cover are plugins. And so coming back here to the capability toolkit, we have skills and MCPs, both of which under the hood are often using CLIs, command line interfaces. And what plugins now are community created bundles of all of these skills, MCPs, and subagents packaged together. Now, you've already installed some plugins if you've been following along with this course. This public repository from which we got the PDF skill and the skill creator skill is a plugin. And so the way plugins are organized is that a plugin is part of a marketplace. A marketplace is simply a Git repository, and a marketplace can contain multiple plugins. So by first registering a marketplace like this, then going to Claude Code, adding it, you can now go to plugins here, and for whatever marketplace you have registered, you'll be able to go through and see all sorts of plugins that exist. So here's a plugin for Figma for design. Here's a plugin for Slack, a plugin for Telegram. There's all sorts of plugins that come with this Claude Plugins official marketplace, which I had installed a little while ago. The benefit of plugins is that they are easily shareable. So you can make them available to the public, like we've seen with these plugins, or you can also make plugins which are just shared internally with your team. Most of the time, however, if you want to share things in Claude Code, I recommend just creating a Git repository and sharing them that way. We'll get into the Git system later in this course. What I'd like you to do now is just install a plugin, which we're going to be using heavily when we get to the part of the course where we're building full-blown web apps deployed on the internet. And that's this plugin, the Compound Engineering plugin. The goal of the Compound Engineering plugin is to make each unit of engineering work such that subsequent units are easier, not harder. And from my experience using the Compound Engineering plugin, I think it really does meet that standard. On my website, I've got an extensive article on using the Compound Engineering plugin, and I also made a pretty popular video on YouTube about this plugin. For now, I just want you to install it, which will take 2 steps. First, you copy this top line, copy it, come here, and paste it in. Then second, copy this line and paste it in. I already have it installed, so it's already there. Once you do that, Control-C twice, press Claude again, and then if you type in something like this, CE:, you're going to see a bunch of new compound engineering related skills that are available. I just want you to know about a few of these for now because you might find them very useful immediately, even before getting to building any sort of applications. The first skill is this one, CE Ideate, which you can use to have Claude Code help you evaluate improvement ideas for your project. So sometimes you're at a very vague stage of ideation, whether that's on a business project, a client project, or some academic research project. And CE Ideate is a really great tool to use when you're at that stage on a project. And so you could think this as being like well downstream of wanting to make a plan. When you're just kind of like in an idea space, mulling things over, this is a really nicely made skill to help you do that. Now, once you've got a clear idea that you want to flesh out, whatever it is, this next skill, CE Brainstorm, is really useful. It helps you explore the requirements and approaches through collaborative dialogue. So coming back here, for example, we've got this email manager skill that we've already made. And maybe I want to improve it, but I don't really know how. I might invoke now CE Ideate and just ask it, IDK, how to improve email manager? Give me some ideas, the skill. And compound engineering is going to help us get some ideas of how to improve this skill. While that's going on, I want to introduce the final fundamental concept in Claude Code. Subagents. Subagents are specialized AI assistants that handle specific types of tasks. Now, that sounds kind of vague, and it sounds a little bit just like a skill, but the next sentence here is very important. Each subagent runs in its own context window with a custom system prompt, specific tool access, and independent permissions. When Claude encounters a task that matches a subagent's description, it delegates that subagent, which works independently and returns results. So this piece here, its own context window, is extremely important. So when I asked Claude Code to spin up subagents for each of these YouTubers, AI YouTubers, YouTube channels, and create profiles, that basically created 14 independent Claude Code sessions, each of which was just tasked with creating and writing the profile of that YouTuber. And so my main Claude Code session didn't see all the processing, the thinking, the grabbing of the YouTube videos. All it ends up seeing is the output, which is something like this. And as a consequence, I save on a lot of tokens in my main Claude Code session. And so that's really the benefit of these subagents, is it allows you to parallelize work while keeping your main stream of work going on. Now, the way in which I used subagents was just to ask Claude Code, hey, spin up some subagents. And Claude Code can do that. If you just ask it to make some subagents on a task that you think fits this, just like the YouTube task that I just did, Claude Code will just do it. But you can also define your own subagents at a project level or at a user level, just like you do with skills. Subagents are also a big part of the compound engineering plugin, which I want to show you now. So if you look at the left-hand column here, you'll see that there's this skills folder, but there's also an agents folder. So this agents folder has a bunch of subagents. Now, one nice part of the compound engineering process is this step where you can invoke this skill to do review of your code, to check its quality along many dimensions. And what we see here is that this skill also includes several reviewer personas, which get invoked if it's considered useful in this context for this skill to be invoked. So there's a testing reviewer, a correctness reviewer, a maintainability reviewer, an agent native reviewer. Then there's also this one for different programming languages like Python, Rails, or TypeScript. There's different reviewers. Each of these reviewers is actually a subagent. And so if we come here into the agents and then the review subfolder, you'll see that here we have a bunch of subagents defined. So let's take a look at one of them. So this one is called the adversarial reviewer, selected when the diff is large, meaning there's more than 50 changed lines, or it touches high-risk domains. And it says, you are a chaos engineer who reads code by trying to break it. Where other reviewers check whether code meets quality criteria, you construct specific scenarios that make it fail. So when you invoke this subagent, it's going to look over the changes you've made to your code or your project, and it's going to act in the persona, which is defined in this file. And so this file, this subagent definition file, it even specifies things that shouldn't be flagged. And so the idea is that each of these subagents has their own set of things that they're focused on. And then when you use compound engineering, you can get 14 pretty independent, or like a dozen, 10 really independent reviews of your code. And if they are all lining up on certain issues, then you're going to know that that's an issue that you need to deal with. And so that's one example of how subagents can be used. I'm going to show you them in practice as we actually get into our practical application of building a web app live. This ideation skill that we had started finished, so I want to show you some of the things it came up with. So here it is. It basically got an understanding of the project, got an understanding of the email manager skill, and then it's given me like a bunch of different ideas of what should be done. So the first thing it's noticing is that we have a bunch of copies in different locations. So we should standardize that, right? So that was something that came about because we have this GWS Gmail one, an email manager one, another one. So that's 4 copies. So that's an obvious improvement that we can make. Then this is an interesting one. It discovered that right now it's reading individual messages and not the entire conversation context, which is going to be very important for deciding whether to triage or draft replies. And so that's a pretty cool improvement that I might not have been aware of for a long time had I not invoked this skill. And so it came up with a bunch of other cool improvements like that. And so the next steps would be I could brainstorm on one of them, I could create a plan, or I could just start to implement one of these improvements. So I've now introduced to you all of these capabilities, defined them, and explained how they work. What I kind of want to do now is a summary of when you should use which of these, like how I actually think of doing things with regards to all these different options that are out there. So first, we discussed the CLAUDE.md, and in general, my recommendation is you don't really need to use it, but skills are pretty important and you do need to have them quite often. And so what I recommend is that for every kind of thing that you see yourself doing more than one time in a project or across projects, or maybe set a barrier more than 3 times, then it means that you have to make a skill. Like, if you find yourself often lacking on some information about how some system works, then you should create a skill for that system. Or if there's a particular way in which you like to have your research notes structured and how you want them organized, you should make a research notes skill. The next distinction here is between skills and MCPs. Now, yes, MCPs can sometimes give you access to a system Claude can't reach otherwise. So sometimes it's the case that there are systems where the only way you can interact with them is by MCP because they lock you out from using their API. But Claude Code may still need to know how to interact with an MCP in the way you prefer. And so that's why this says here that you can kind of think of skills as being instructions for how to do a job, though especially when there's an API, it can also be the tool that's enabling Claude Code to do the job, because as you now know, a skill is not just a file, but a set of scripts and a whole folder that goes along with that skill.md file. Then finally, the distinction between an MCP versus a plugin. An MCP is giving you access to one external system, whereas a plugin is a bundle of skills and possibly MCPs and subagents, someone packaged for you to install. And finally, a question that may arise is between using some built-in plugin or some built-out plugin or making your own skills. If you're using something like this compound engineering plugin, which I just introduced, then you're working within this organization's ecosystem of how it's thinking about the best way to build applications to work with agentic coding tools. But the reason I'm okay with that is because I've seen them making improvements very rapidly over time. They do a great job and they have lots of great ideas. So I'm okay with just delegating the improvements to the skills to them and then just benefiting from it. I also have tons of my own skills, and I recommend you often, or maybe primarily, are making your own skills as well, because you know your workflows better than anybody else. But one big outstanding question that you may still have is, when does a skill become an app? All these skills that we've been working with just work typically with files on our computer, and usually it's just going to be me who needs to interact with whatever it is the skill is doing. But sometimes it makes sense to evolve a skill into a full-blown web app. What are some signs of this? One is that you need some kind of persistence over time. There's some kind of state that you need to track, perhaps the status of certain items, or you need to bring in data from external systems and have that always available. You can do this with a skill, but in some ways it's going to be easier with a web app. Maybe you also need a visual interface, either for yourself or because you have other non-technical users who you want to use this tool you're making and you know you're never going to get them to sit through my amazing Claude Code course. And so when you have this set of needs, it might be appropriate at that point to think about building an app instead of a skill. But wherever possible, I recommend starting with skills first. They're always easier to make, quicker to get out, and extremely generally useful. The application we're going to build together is a job application tracker. So the context is that you need some sort of visual dashboard in which to envision the status of all of your different jobs, perhaps be able to filter them, see which ones need a cover letter, which ones are currently at an interview stage. And this can help you or whoever is using it be able to more efficiently go through jobs. And by having a visual dashboard, you'll be able to share this with your team. This application is going to be independently useful to many of you, but functionally, it's going to be very similar to a CRM. So if you have any kind of business where you need to keep track of all the relationships and contacts with your customers, you'll be able to use this framework that we're going to build out live to have a live deployed on the internet web application for any app that you may want to build. But in order to be able to build this app, you're going to have to first understand a fundamental concept in software development called Git and the associated tool GitHub. Now, during this whole course, you've already been using Git, which is a version control tool, a way of tracking changes in your project. We used this Anthropic skills Git repository to install the skill creator and front-end design skill, and also the example skills plugin. Here's another Git repository we used, destructive command guard, and then also this one for compound engineering. Git helps you solve all sorts of problems, like how do I experiment with new ideas and roll them back if they didn't work out? How do I have different versions of my project without just copying files around? And also, how do you back up your work and keep it safe so that if you delete it, you're able to access it from somewhere seamlessly? But you don't need to think of Git as some complex developer tool. It maps to 4 things that you're probably already doing. First, when you start a project, you have to create a project folder, and the equivalent to this is git init, which is the act of creating a Git repository. When you save your work, the equivalent here is a git commit, which is effectively saying, here are the things that changed since the last time I committed to the Git repository. So typically, when you save your work, that backs it up in one sense, but it doesn't allow you to tell exactly what changed relative to the last time that's saved. The Git system allows you to see exactly what changed relative to the last time you saved. So if we come here to the Anthropic skills repository, for example, and click here on these 25 commits, we can see all these incremental changes that have been made to the project. And so, for example, I can click in on this one, and I can see that 27 files changed, and I can see exactly what occurred in that change. And that's useful to us as programmers, but it's going to be particularly useful to Claude Code to help it understand how a project has evolved. Next, a common workflow is that you'll copy your files over from one place to another if you want to try something new. And the alternative in the Git world is to create a branch. We're not going to go that much into branching because we'll be able to do everything without this concept, but it is something useful to be aware of. And finally, you probably use a tool like Dropbox or Google Drive to back up your work. And the equivalent in the Git world is pushing to a remote Git repository. So this Git repository, this version control system, you can use it just on your own computer. But then if you put it on a remote repository like that of GitHub, it gives you a way to back up all your files and the history behind them so that your work no longer depends on it sitting on your computer. And this moving of files from your computer to GitHub is also going to be an essential step to making sure this project lives somewhere on the internet, so that if you have this web app, it can be deployed on an actual website. So that brings us to this idea of Git versus GitHub, which is something that beginners often get confused by. What exactly is the difference between these two? So Git is something that's running on your own computer. It's also running on computers that are owned by Microsoft, which is the current owner of GitHub. And so when you make a change, these commits on your computer, they'll be stored here on your PC. But if you delete the Git repository accidentally on your PC, then you'll have to start from scratch. And so what you should do, and as I'll show you, Claude Code is going to make this easy, is you do what's called a push to GitHub. It's taking the files from your computer and putting it on GitHub's computer. Then it's going to show up just like that skills repository, destructive command guard, etc. on GitHub. All those commits will be there. And then if your laptop dies, like it gets completely wiped out, you can just go to your new computer and do what's called a pull. And you basically take all of this history, which is stored on GitHub, and bring it to your new computer. And then a last important piece is that the way in which tools that you use to actually make your website are going to know about your Git repository is through GitHub. So the tool that I'm going to show you how to use is Vercel, which will help us make out of this web app an actual website. Now I'm going to show you how to get Git installed, set up your own GitHub account, and get the GitHub command line interface working. First, let's come back to the terminal, and if you don't know what directory you're in, the command for that is pwd, present working directory. So I can see that I'm in a Claude Code course directory. And if I want to see what files are inside, I do ls for list files. And I can see I've got a few different directories here. So the first thing I'll do is make a new directory for this new app that we're going to put together. So that's mkdir jobs application tracker. And then in order to go inside that directory, I'm going to use cd jobs, and then I can just do a tab and it should complete the rest of that. So there I am. Now I'm in this new directory and there's nothing inside. The first thing I'll need you to install is Git. And so the command here is just brew install Git. So copy it, go over here, press enter. And if you don't have Git installed, it should install it for you. Once you've got Git installed, I want you to install this GitHub command line interface, for which the command is brew install gh. So I come back here and I'm just going to put in brew install gh and press enter. I've already got it installed, so maybe it's going to update it for me. Next, come here to github.com, put in your email, and then sign up for GitHub. So you click that button, and there's going to be different ways and you can sign up, either with Google, with Apple, or putting in a new password. So go through, do that, and then the next time you go to GitHub, you should see a page like this, which will have some repositories to the right, a home page, and you should be able to come here and click on your profile picture. The next thing we'll want to do is connect this GH command line interface to your account. So we'll come back here to the terminal and you type in GH auth login. Enter. You should say, I use GitHub on github.com. Say HTTPS for your preferred protocol. And then say you want to log in with a web browser. Then there's going to be a one-time code, which comes here. I want you to copy that code and then press enter, and your web browser should open up. Choose your user and then paste in that code and press continue. Then you'll see something like this. Say authorize GitHub. You might have to put in your password or authenticate again. I'll just go here and say use your password, confirm. There. Now you're in. And if you now come back here, it's going to say logged in as Aniket Panjwani. So this is going to be a very useful tool to help Claude Code communicate with GitHub. Now we're almost ready to start building this web app. But before we get started, I want to describe what technologies we're going to be using to build this application. Another term that you'll hear for this is our stack, the set of different layers that are going to come together to make this job applications tracker. Every web app, whether it's Twitter, Airbnb, or the jobs application tracker we're about to make, has 3 layers. First, there's a front end. That's the website that you actually see and click on. Then there's a back end, which is a database which you don't see, but which all the data associated with your application is stored in. So in our context, it'll be our job applications, companies, statuses. Then lastly, there's hosting, how this application, this front end and back end, actually lives on the internet so that people are able to access it and interact with it. When we were making skills, it was fine for us to just be working on our own computer. But now we want something that's going to be visible not only to us when we're at a different computer, but also to other people. And so what we need to do is pick one tool for each of these layers. The 3 tools that we're going to be choosing are Next.js, that will be our front end, Convex, that's going to be our back end, and Vercel is how we're going to deploy or run this application. And so broadly, the flow here is going to be, you're going to use Claude Code to write this code. And the code is going to be both the code that corresponds to the back end and the code that corresponds to the front end. Now, you may think, I don't know anything about coding. And as I'm going to show you, I'm going to be able to make this application knowing almost nothing or saying almost nothing specifically about coding, except specifying the technology choices that I want to use. Then once all this code is written, you'll use this command git push to put the code on GitHub. Then what we'll set up is a system so that the code on GitHub goes and gets sent to an actual server somewhere on the internet, which is managed by Vercel. So they'll be able to go to some actual website and be able to see this web application that you've made. And so users here will be able to visit the website, and what it looks like to them is this thing, the Next.js front end. They'll see data that's pulled in from the back end, but that's not something that they're going to be super aware of. That's something for us as developers to be aware of. Now, for each of these decisions, the front end, the back end, and the hosting, there's lots of different options and many choices that one could use. For different reasons, I think all of these are really great for beginners, and these are the tools that I use for most applications I build myself for clients or as the director of AI and ML at PaySlice. So just to repeat, Next.js here is the framework that we'll be using for the front end. It's got a lot of very useful, very handy features. You're not going to need to know how it works under the hood. Claude Code is going to deal with that. But as you can see, there's lots of very big, well-known websites like that of Notion and Audible and the Washington Post, which are built using Next.js. Convex is the tool that we're going to be using for the back end. The thing that I like about it is that usually you have to use a separate tool like Subagents or PostgreSQL for your database. And with Convex, the code for the front end and the back end can be very tightly integrated. But again, these aren't things that you have to be super aware of as you become more advanced. Of course, it makes sense to learn more about these underlying technologies, but as I'll show you, we'll be able to get pretty far without you knowing anything about programming. Finally, the tool which you're going to be using to deploy the app is Vercel, which is one of the most popular tools in the world for people to deploy applications, whether they're beginners, intermediate, or advanced. And so this is going to be very valuable knowledge to you going into the future in your general journey with AI and software. Next, in order to use these tools, there's a set of prerequisites that you're going to have to go through again, just a few more things to install, and then we'll actually get to building the application. First, I want you to install this tool called Node, which is going to be important both for Next.js and Convex. So you guys are pros now. You just copy this, come over here, paste it in, press enter, and let it do its thing. Next, I want you to go to the Convex website at convex.dev, then go here to log in. I want you to say continue with GitHub. Then I want you to log in with the GitHub account that you just created if you had just created a GitHub account. Once you log in, you should be able to go here to dashboard.convex.dev, and you'll see something like this that has different projects listed. You won't have any projects yet. You can click here and see your profile settings. Convex has a free plan and a professional plan for everybody here. The free plan is going to be more than enough. Next, I want you to install the Convex command line interface. So if you've just installed this tool npm, you should be able to type in this command npm install -g convex. Press enter, and it should install Convex for you globally. Finally, I want you to come here to the Vercel website. I want you to click sign up. It'll ask you to make a team name, so you can just put your name, Unikate's team, create team. Okay, that looks good. Create team. And then again, I want you to come here, say continue with GitHub. You'll again have to log into GitHub, and then you should arrive at vercel.com at a dashboard that looks something like this. So I've got a lot of projects in here. You probably don't have any projects yet, but you'll be able to see this same left-hand side. Next, similar to the GitHub command line interface we installed, I want you to install a command line interface for Vercel. So you just come here to vercel.com/docs/CLI. So what I want you to do is just copy this bit. Don't include the P, which is a different tool that we're not using. Come over here, just like that, and then press enter. Then it should be installed. Next, similarly to how we logged into GitHub, we want to log into Vercel. So I'm going to do this, Vercel login. It'll open up something like this. I'm just going to say allow, authorization successful. I go back and it says, congratulations, you are now signed in. That's all the setup. You now have accounts set up for GitHub, Convex, and Vercel. Claude Code is going to know how to interact with these. And so now we can get to the exciting part, actually building the web app. All right, very exciting. Let's get started. So let's come here to Claude, enter. And the first thing I'm going to do is just ask it, create a new Git repository for a project job applications tracker, and then use the GitHub command line interface to create a new private repository on GitHub and make a README as well. So if you might remember, the initialization of a Git repository is equivalent to kind of starting a new project. And then we're going to get this onto GitHub. On GitHub, you can have either private or public repositories. I would recommend you just make all your repositories private, unless it's something you want everybody to be able to see, which most of the time you don't. Just if you're creating some open source project, then you can make it public. Otherwise, always make it private. And then I'm asking it to make a README, just so that there's at least one file in the repository that'll help a little bit with being able to see it on GitHub. So I'm going to press enter. At the same time, let's come back to Visual Studio Code and then find the folder that we're working in. Here I have job applications tracker. So I'm going to open that up. Great. And so now we can see that there's no files inside here. Now, if we come here, we're going to see that it's asking me for permissions. So for now, I'm going to allow it to ask for permissions. Now it's going through the act of using this GH tool to actually create the repo on GitHub. So I'm going to allow it to do that. Great. And now it says we have this private GitHub repo created at this location. So let's go here. Let me just copy that. And we can see here that I now have a GitHub repository. It's got this little lock here, which means it's private. And it says this is a tool for tracking job applications, their statuses, and related details. There's only been one commit or save made, which has just been this file. And it says Aniket Panjwani and Claude. So Claude by default will tag itself as a co-author on all your commits. Next, I'm going to use this tool update config to make sure that we have YOLO mode or bypass permissions turned on in this project. I want YOLO mode or bypass permissions for everything to be turned on this project, just like total full access as much as possible. All right, so it's going to make that for us. And then I come back here and we can see that in VS Code, we can now see the README and we can see this. So this is going to be helpful just for you to kind of get a visual idea, be able to click around on things and browse on things, but you're not going to write any code manually. And really, if you wanted to make this application without ever even looking at the code, you'd be able to do that just by talking to Claude. There's just going to be a lot of different steps along the way to deploying it that you'll have to get accustomed to, but that's what I'm here for, to help you through that whole process. So I'm going through, and we're going to give Claude the ability now for this bypass mode. And so let's see if we can enter it right away. We can't, and so we do Control-C twice. Okay, we left it. Let me do clear to clear the terminal. Now I'm going to do Claude, enter, and now we see that bypass permissions is on, so we're going to be able to go through faster. Next, I'm going to take you through the process of actually making this job applications tracker using this Compound Engineering plugin, which you should already have installed. Now, as I mentioned, with the Compound Engineering plugin, there's a bunch of different options that correspond to the entire work process. So the main ones that you have to care about are plan, work, ideate, and then also brainstorm. And so I'm going to start at the most upstream one, ideate, which kind of helps us think through ideas of what it is that we should even include in this application for it to be useful to us. I want to create an application with Next.js, Convex, and deploy it on Vercel. Actually, I want this to be a job applications tracker. I want to also have a Claude skill associated with it that we'll be able to use to interact with it manually. I want to be able to log in with my username and password using BetterAuth. There is a Convex component for BetterAuth. The application should help me add jobs I'm applying for. Maybe with Claude, I could point it at an application and then, or like a job that I'm interested in, and then have it entered into our database. And then I'd be able to go look at the web app and be able to see like the different jobs, their status, etc. And so the reason why you would use this tool Ideate is when you're at a point where you don't even know specifically, completely what it is that you want to include in the application. And so you can kind of see here in the skill definition what it does. Use when asking what to improve, requesting idea generation, exploring surprise improvements, or wanting the AI to proactively suggest strong project directions before brainstorming one in depth. So we already have a solid idea of what we want to build. So it may have made sense to go straight to the brainstorm step, but I also just wanted to show you what this ideate skill does in compound engineering, because I find it pretty useful. Even when you're thinking about, for example, how you could go about improving your skills or adding on new features to your skills that you may have not thought of before, I find Ideate very useful for that. All right, so we see this finished, and if I scroll up here, it says it came up with 40 raw ideas across 5 agents. And so here are the ideas that it thinks that we should build. One is a Claude-powered job posting ingestion. That sounds good. Second, some sort of append-only event timeline. Sure. And so instead of a status dropdown, model each application as an append-only array of events. I'm not a programmer. I don't even know what that means. Let's just say, sure, that sounds great. Status pipeline with staleness detection. A Kanban style board view. Okay, sure, why not? Batch status triage, a Claude CLI command where you dump a natural language update and Claude parses it into multiple convex mutations. Sounds good. When you advance a job to the interview stage, an interview prep context builder, yeah, that sounds great. And then CLI as a first class input path. Again, I don't know anything about programming, so I'm just going to say yes, yes, yes. That all sounds great. And so I'm just going to say it's giving me now options of brainstorm a selected idea, refine the ideation, share to proof, end session. So I'm going to say save the ideas. I like them. Then let's start brainstorming. And so the idea here is that this ideate command basically helps you come up with ideas for you to implement. And now this brainstorm thing is then going to help you narrow down your requirements of what those ideas should include. And so if I was pursuing this myself, I might be more critical or push back against some of these things. But I want to show you how far you can get without really needing to know anything about programming, understanding data models, software architecture, because the tool is just pretty freaking smart. Let's just say, sure, that sounds great. I'm basically just going to try to go through this and just say yes, 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 yes. Okay. Because you can have very nice things come up. Basically just following Claude Code's recommendations totally brainlessly and just like literally pressing yes, yes, yes over and over again. So as much as possible, I'm going to try to make this entire application as mindlessly as I can. And just speaking it to it in terms of natural language like a human, except for a few areas where you have to like make a technology choice, log into these accounts, stuff like that. Let's say just for me or multiple users, just me. I'm the only user. Okay, let's just do the recommended one. So I'm a non-programmer. I don't know what those things mean. Here, I'm going to say both. So it's like if you want to add jobs using the skill that I want to make for adding jobs, which one should we use? A URL or pasting the job text? I want both. Like, we should try using the URL first. If that doesn't work, then we can manually copy and paste the job text. What's the primary view you want to see when you log in? Kanban board sounds good. What application stages make sense? Let's just do the simple 5-stage, and then we can always change it later. What level of detail do you want? We can do minimal for now. I'm just going to follow the recommendations anytime it gives a recommendation. So we can see now that it's storing a requirements document. If I come back here, what we'll see is that there's this ideation document that's been made, okay? And then we can also see here that there's a brainstorms folder which has been made, but nothing's inside it yet. So that's probably being written right now. Let's just wait. Okay, so it's done. If we come here, we see that this brainstorming document has been created with the suggested structure of this application. And now there's basically two directions we could go. We could do this ask more questions, a structured review, or go straight to making a plan from these requirements. So I'm just going to do the recommendation and let's try it out. All right, so it's been thinking for a few minutes and it did some research to come up with decisions that need to be made before it can write the plan. Now, over here, it's telling me all sorts of programming stuff I don't understand. I don't care. I'm just going to press enter. Okay, so if this was a more advanced Claude Code course, I would sort of take you guys through understanding how things work in more detail. But right now, I just want to go super fast, easy, and show you that you can make things pretty much by just going and pressing yes. Can jobs skip stages, go straight from bookmark straight to interviewing via referral? Can they move backward, interviewing back to apply to correct a mistake? Yeah, that sounds good. So let's allow for that. Flexible. And so these are ideas that you might not even have when you were thinking about making the application, but Claude Code can help you out a lot with that. Event types. Should substage events be first-class event types, or should the 5 stages plus 5 closure types be the full enum with substage detail captured in event notes? Again, I don't know anything, so I'm just going to keep pressing enter. I trust you, Claude Code, with my life, with my finances, with everything. Will grow unboundedly as application. How should the Kanban resolve this? Collapsed by default. So it's just saying that like if you have this Kanban graph, the closed column will keep getting bigger as more jobs get closed. It could be kind of messy. And so let's just let it make the plan. All right. So it says plan ready. So this plan got made. And it says this is a deep plan. So in compound engineering, they sometimes distinguish between deep, normal, and shallow plans. And so since we're doing a lot of things in this one, it is often going to suggest doing this step of document review, which is like it uses some other subagents. You remember what subagents are, to test the plan that was just made. And so we see this plan that's been created. It's pretty long, pretty extensive. It's thinking through the web application, the data model, and these Claude skills, and all this complex technical stuff in here. And so the question is, can you make an app without reading any of this? And so there's a lot of technical stuff that basically Claude Code is putting here to be able to effectively communicate with later versions of itself, we could say. But if you just want to keep pressing enter, you'll be able to get good results. So I'm going to do this document review step, but I'm not actually going to read the plan in great detail. So let's try that. Now, I want to, while this is running, tell you some differences with how I would do this myself. So sometimes, like, I'm working on projects like this, which I'm okay with not having everything done perfectly in a particular way. And so I might be open to letting Claude Code just do a big set of things in one go like this. But other times, what I'll probably do is do smaller bits of work at a time. But I wanted to show you also that Claude Code can pretty easily do big amounts of work all at once. And so, as I mentioned here, it's enabled 7 different reviewers to do independent reviews of that plan. And so that's going to run for a little bit, and then we'll see how it goes. All right. So this document review step here finished, and I'll just show you what it does in general. So we had these independent reviewers, each of whom found issues with the original plan. And then the different issues get characterized by should fix or consider fixing. And so one of the things that's being considered here is that maybe the way in which I proposed having authentication is over-engineered. And so what I want to tell it is that I want to keep authentication because I want other people to be able to log in with email and password as well. Because one of the things I want to show you is how easy it is to be able to have a multi-user application. And so I'm actually changing things up a little bit. And let's actually make this a multi-tenant, meaning that it's for multiple people application. So different people can log in here and add their job applications. I'm going to change it again. Actually, I just want there to be one user, but I want it to still have email login just for that user in case I want to extend this later. All right. So I decided to keep it with the single user idea. It says the review is complete. Address the rest of the findings in the plan as you see fit. So I'm going to have it update the plan now. It'll make some changes, and then we'll basically be ready to get started on implementation. All right, so this completed, and I want to show you guys something. If we come here and look at the currently used context, what we're probably going to find is that a lot of the 1 million context window is used up right now. Actually, we've got a lot more context remaining than I had thought. So if you look here, for example, we have this is taken up right now, and then we have all of this free. So we could, now that this plan is completed, just have Claude Code execute the plan without clearing the context window first. But I'm going to do that anyway, just because I want to start from a clean context window, and generally Claude Code does better when you do that. But before I do that, I'm going to commit and push all this documentation we've been making with Claude Code because I want to save that. Can you commit and push the docs we've made? Enter. So let's do that. If you come here to VS Code, you'll see all this stuff is green. And right now it has a U here, which means it's untracked. It's not being tracked in the Git system. And now Claude Code finished, you can see it says it committed and pushed here. And if we go back here, we can see that there's this new commit for adding ideation, requirements, and implementation plan. And over here in the job applications tracker, you can see that there's this second commit now made. So let's actually get started now on having Claude Code do this. So what I'm going to do is do Control C twice now, and then I'll just type in Claude again. And now let's start a new Claude Code session. So I'm just going to do CE work, and then let's do the single plan we have, because we only have one plan right now. If I had been working on this project for a while and there were multiple plans, then I would just copy the name of that actual plan, or you can just say, do the one about jobs. And if there's no other one about jobs, it should be able to find it. Okay, so it's suggesting here's a branch name, a Convex project, some admin credentials, and should I use npx create next app, or do you have a preference? So I just want to show you like how to do this, knowing as little as possible. So basically, we're just going to agree with everything Claude Code tells us. Sure, I need you to initialize one. Just make up whatever, and we can change it later. Sure. So I have my own opinions on what choices I would make with respect to each of these, but I want to show you that Claude Code can just figure it out itself. Now, this is kind of cool. It's sort of figured out a dependency structure between all of these. So it knows which of these to start on first. All right. So it reached a stopping point here where there's something that Claude Code can't do because it needs to be done interactively. And so what it's asking us to do is to run this, which now allows us to run terminal commands, but lets Claude Code see the results of the terminal command, so we don't have to open up a separate terminal. So let's just follow its instructions directly. Let's try this first. And then I'm going to tell it that this came up. That came up. Should I open a new terminal? Yeah, so it's saying that we should open a new terminal. So I'm going to do that with Command T. And now let's try again, npx convex dev. So this is the step that's needed in order to create a new project. So this is what you see here is the interface that Claude Code couldn't get through on its own. So I'm going to say create a new project. And then I have two teams. You should probably just have one. So I'll put it in my own team. We'll call it job applications tracker. Importantly here, choose cloud deployment. We'll do it in Northern Virginia because America. And then let's just say yes to this. This is going to add some skills for how to use Convex best, I guess. This says Convex AI files installed. And then weird, it got some error. So let me do this. I'm just going to copy all of this. This is the common way I like to use to debug errors, is just copy and paste. So let's try that. And basically, anytime you get an error, just go and copy and paste stuff until it's solved. So we go back here, look at that. So this thing is coming up right now saying running TypeScript, finalizing push, and some of the tables that's going to be in our database have now been created. And so we can leave this open. Let's come back here and we'll just say it worked. What's next? And then hopefully Claude Code will now just keep going on through this project. Yep. So it says that Unit 2 and Unit 3 have now been unblocked. And so hopefully soon we'll be able to now test out locally our website. In fact, let's ask it that. When will we be able to test out something on our own computer? So you can always just press escape and ask it a question like this if you're curious or you don't understand something. It says, do this first. And then it says you can run npm run dev now, which I think, okay, we did npx convex dev. So let me do npm run dev, which is going to be, all right. So we got some error. And so let's do our favorite strategy of copying and just pasting errors. And that's it. It just tells us what to do. All right. So it finished this. So let's try npm run dev again. We'll just come back here, same command. Okay, so let's go now to right here. And you can see here that it said it's compiling. It's basically making that web page available for us to see locally. And you can see here that we've got a login page. We won't be able to do anything with this login page yet, but it's just a start. Now, one little trick I like to do is ask Claude Code to help us make it so that we have a command which lets us start up the front end and the back end locally at the same time. So I'm going to ask you to do that, and you can just copy this instruction when you're making your own application. You help us use concurrently to be able to start the front end and back end Convex at the same time with npm run dev. And so concurrently is just a package, which makes it easier for us to have a single command to simultaneously run Next.js and Convex together instead of having to run them both one at a time. And that makes developing it a lot quicker. So if I do npm run dev now, we see this concurrently command come up, and then we see Next.js and Convex both start up. So now I'm just going to ask it, continue to the next tasks. And now Claude Code will continue working on these other units. All right, so it finished unit 3. It's gone on to unit 2 and unit 7. Oh, I guess it did unit 6 as well. So happy to just let it go on autonomously and do its thing. If we can get something usable, testable up earlier, I'm happy to let it happen. Okay, so it's crossed off a lot of these, but now wants to create a directory and is asking for permission. So I'm going to say yes. For some reason, it went into this accept edits on. I'm going to bring it back to bypass permissions on. But that is something that I've noticed happen when you use the CE work command. The permissions mode will change. And so I've changed it back to bypass permissions on. For some reason, still seems to be asking me for permission. Whatever, just do that and keep going. Okay, it looks like almost everything is done here. If we come here to VS Code, we can take a little look at the code that's been created. There's quite a lot. You can see there's this whole giant directory structure. I guess there's all these different skills that have been created for basically every kind of thing other than Claude Code as well, to have available to help it understand how Convex works. That was part of the Convex setup, I believe. Most of those aren't super needed. We can delete them later, but there's this app folder for the main application, a components folder for individual pieces like the Kanban board, a Kanban column, Convex. These are the docs we made. Here are, I guess, some library files with certain constants. So like these are the different ways in which an application or like a job can be considered to be closed. And so this closed events type variable gets imported all over. We want it to be standardized. And so that's why Claude Code decided to put it in this constants file. Node modules has all the packages that go along or are imported, like the node packages that are used as part of this application. Again, you don't really need to know all this stuff. You can just kind of work with it in a human way, asking natural language questions when you're confused to understand what the application does and what you want it to do. So if we go here, it says now you need to do 2 things to test the full app. Get your Convex admin key and then paste it into here as the Convex admin key value. So let's try to do that. We'll go here, copy, and then I'll just paste it in here, press enter. All right, so that command doesn't exist, even though Claude Code thinks it does. Again, I'm going to approach this thoughtlessly. I know what the issue is, but how would we solve this if we were just going back and forth? So now it's saying you can find the admin key in the Convex dashboard, run this. So let's try that instead. npx convex dashboard. So that's going to open up the dashboard in my web browser. All right, here we are. Then we come back. So the instruction is settings deploy key. Settings, probably in, here, generate deploy key. Let's do this one. Just call it Claude Code. I'm going to copy that. And then it says paste it into .env.local as convex admin key. So you come here, you got this .env.local. We see this convex admin key is open, paste it, and then I'm going to save it. All right, so now it should be in there. Now, one thing I want to ask it is, do we need separate ones for development and production? So one of the nice things about Convex is that you can have a development database and a production database. And so that allows you to do development locally without interrupting the production database. And so what it says is when you deploy to production, you'll create a separate deployment with its own admin key. But for building and testing locally, the dev key is all you need. Great. So, okay, I did it. What's next? You don't even have to really keep track of what's needed to proceed in the application development because it already sort of has that in its memory. And so I'm just going to do the next command that it asked me to do. Let's try that. Okay, got an error, all good. We just copy and paste it. Don't even need to understand it. When you encounter these errors, just copy and paste. Now, like one thing you might be wondering is, am I arguing against understanding how computers work overall? And maybe to some extent I am, because some kinds of knowledge is no longer as important now in the LLM era as it was before. And a lot of people who are really obstinate are really opposed to that. But my belief is that as you're approaching this technical knowledge, what I want you to do is be able to build things that are useful to you as early as you can. And then later we can kind of go back and backfill that technical knowledge. And a great way to do that is whenever you're confused, just ask Claude Code what it is that you're confused about to explain it in language you can understand. We've already done that a few times, like with Claude Code Guide. And that's something you can really do with anything on programming or anything at all. Like you want to learn biology, just ask Claude Code in terms you understand. So this admin user is seated. And so we can say, it worked. Now what? How can I test it? Okay, so I'm going to come in here and it's saying log in with this test user and this password. All right, so here's what it looks like. No applications yet. Add your first job. All right, so that looks pretty painful to fill out, but let's say I'm applying to OpenAI as Chief Executive Officer. And compensation notes are $3 quadrillion. Deadline April 3rd, 2026. Create job. Okay, so we see this thing shows up. Let's go back to the dashboard and we see we've got this Kanban view now to be able to track all my jobs. And so my question is, can I drag it? No, I can't. So I might want to have that. So I'm going to just come back here and say, is there any way we can set it up so that I can drag stuff on the Kanban board to different columns? Often you can just notice things that you don't like on there, and now it's going to just add that. It already knows what sorts of packages to install or to use to facilitate this kind of thing. And then we should have this drag and drop ability created. All right, so it seems to have completed this change. Let's see how it works. Okay, so we can take a job here. We can move it there. Oh, it moved into the applied column. Can I move it back? Let's say that was a mistake. Yeah, I can move it back to bookmark. But one thing it's saying is that closed is terminal. You can't drag cards back out of the closed column. So let's do that. And then we see this closed one disappeared, but if we click on that one button, then the closed ones show up. And so that goes back to that thing we were saying where we don't want the closed one to grow indefinitely. And so right now, it's a pretty simple interface. Another thing I'm noticing is that there's nothing to sign out here. Usually you expect there to be a sign out button. So let me ask that. Can you add a sign out button in the navigation bar? So again, if you want these features, you can literally just ask. And then where you get confused, you just ask the tool how to resolve it for you. So there you can see the button has been created. Let's try clicking it. And then we see we're back here. And so that's pretty cool. We've got this working now on our computer. And so what I'm going to say right now is I want to get this on a live website on Convex/Vercel. What do we need to do in Git or anything else to do that? So again, like I just know I need to do this. I think we have one already, but I do know if we're on the right branch. Okay, yes, sounds good. So all these coding tool configs that got added, it's going to make sure to not add them to the Git system because we don't actually want them there. In fact, we should probably delete them, but we can do that later. It's no big deal. It just kind of adds up a little bit of clutter. All right, so we see all these files have now gotten added here in GitHub. So getting it on GitHub is an important step to be able to deploy this on a live site, but we also need to have the production Convex and Vercel connected to this. So Claude Code is going to help us set us all that up so that we don't need to think about it too much. And so it's saying next, connect to Vercel. Let's just ask it. Okay, so yeah, can you do step 1 for me with Vercel CLI? So you guys remember CLIs, I call them CLIs, these command line interfaces. I want to try to get Claude Code to set up as many things as it can for me. And so it's saying that and this thing seems stale. It wants us to log in again. Fine, let's try logging in. So come here, say allow, go back. Sure, let's say yes, continue. Okay, it's setting up some environment variables for us. So this over here is basically making sure that the production website is able to talk to the production database. Again, like when you get confused, just keep saying, hey, I'm confused. I don't really understand what's going on. Tell me exactly what to press. I don't know anything about programming. And the attitude I want you to have is just get shit done, build it, and then move forward. So we keep on going. All right. So it just went through a bunch of different, setup steps. And it says here that the app is now live and you can log in with the same credentials. No, we're using the dev deployment. The data is shared when you're ready for a proper prod deployment with separate data. We can set that up later. So first, let's just test it out. Let's see if this thing on a real website actually works. So I'll just come in here, paste it in, press enter. It's pretty cool. So we got a real web application set up, and then we'll try the same credentials. Come here, email, password, sign in. Awesome. So, if any of you want to go to this website, you know my email and password right now, and you can add all sorts of fake jobs for me. Now, one last thing I wanted to test is that we set up a skill to be able to interact with this database because I find it kind of annoying to be adding these jobs manually. And so can you tell me how to use the skill we set up? I want to use that instead. So it says you just type in jobs tracker into Claude Code, and then you can either paste text or just say add this job. I'm going to go over to Anthropic jobs. Let's say I was applying to Anthropic, and I don't know what I would make sense. I'm a people person, immigration coordinator, real estate. The fuck are these jobs, man? Like, what are they even doing there? Research operations, economics research. I'm going to apply for that job. Let's try this. Jobs tracker. Okay, I don't see it. I don't see jobs tracker. Do I have to restart or something? All right, let's try that. Let's actually resume the session so you can use this to enter the exact same Claude Code session. So I'm going to try that. And sometimes that works to now be able to see the skill. Great. So we got it here. And nope, not that. Enter. So let's see if Claude Code can now scrape that site for us and then extract all the details and get it into the Kanban board. All right. Yes. Create the job. So if I go here now, would you look at that? So it's my real website. I got this job. I can kind of click in on it. We have an event timeline. So I guess as we sort of progress, we can see where it is. I can add notes about it. Coolest company in the world. That's how you spell world if you're a real baller. And that's pretty sweet. So without really needing to code, just asking Claude Code along on some critical steps, we were able to get a web app deployed. Now, as a last step, because I don't want you all losers getting into my Kanban board, let's say I'm now ready for production. Can you help me set up the production database and username, password? Again, I don't have any idea what's going on. I just know that there is this concept of a database, and I'm going to use Claude Code to help me figure everything out. Now, what practically happens is that you kind of like will learn just through experience, right? Like you'll learn stuff over time. So let's see, can you do it all for me? Because I don't want to do anything myself. So just so you guys know, this is what's used to encrypt usernames, or rather passwords, which are stored in the database, just so you're aware of what this thing is doing. And right now it's setting the email and password to be the same email and password, but you can just ask Claude Code to change that later as well. One more thing that I want to be possible is for us to use that skill against either the production database or the development database. So if we wanted to test out the skill in development, we could, or we could use it in its real capacity. So what I'm going to say is, can we make it possible in the skill to use it with either dev or prod, but I want the default to be prod. And so if we look now in this job applications tracker, we see that there's no jobs in here. The reason is that we just switched out that database to be the production database, which was previously empty, instead of the development database. And so this is a nice thing about Convex, that it really just makes it as easy as saying a little verbal instruction to Claude Code, and then you're able to get this nice separation of development and production databases. So now I just asked Claude Code to make it possible to use this skill with either development or production, and it wants us to get that admin key, the same one that we had gotten previously for the development deployment. It's telling us to run npx convex dashboard again, so let's do that. Right there, opens up, but now we're going to come here to production, and then we'll go here to settings, and then we'll say generate, we'll call it Claude Code prod, save it, I'm going to copy that, and then it says add it to your .env.local. So we come over here, we see this, and so let's add convex prod admin key equals that thing, and then we got convex prod URL is this, save, okay, I did it, can you test it? So if we see here, we've got this chief executive officer job here in dev, but when it looked in prod, there was nothing inside. So that's why it says production works, empty database as expected. Let me also verify dev, and it sees these two jobs in there. Awesome. So now we have it separately set up for prod and dev. And the last thing is, can you give me a safe way of creating a new production admin user name and password? I don't want the people watching my current OBS recording to know it. So we had created that username and password. You guys know what it is, and it's telling me how to do that. So I'm going to do exactly this, set a new username and password, and then let's try it out. Okay, I did those two things. So now I'm going to reseed it. It says update.env.local with the same values. Can we have different values for dev and prod? Okay, that's fine. So let's come here. Let's sign out. I did 1 and 2. So can I log in now with that new username / password? Okay, so let's come here. I set this as my username. I'm not telling you guys my password. Sign in. Sweet. So we see this thing is empty. So let's try populating it. I'm going to add a different job, External Affairs Australia. Can you add this now to prod? Yes, sounds good. And as a last step, okay, so we can see that this job is here now, and I want to move it to interviewing. Can you move it to interviewing? Sweet. And it's moved here to interviewing. So that was the full course. I hope you guys liked it. You should definitely go through this. And it was a lot. So you may need to bookmark this video, go through it more than one time. Probably you'll have some questions. Try asking those questions to Claude Code itself. But if you want to ask me questions directly, you can always join my school server, the AI MBA, where there's over 1,500 people trying to get to the cutting edge of agentic coding. We've got AI developers, economists, all sorts of people. And if you want personal training from me, like you want to get to the next level, get on weekly group calls with me and learn how to actually make money with Claude Code and get all my advice, some special trainings on how to do outbound lead generation, all sorts of other things, you can join my school server, the AI MBA Pro, where you come in and you'll be able to be in a community of people who are all super committed, who are all showing up every week and improving each week. And you're able to ask me whatever question you want. So hope you guys enjoyed this. That's the course, and I'll see you in the next video.